Underappreciated is a word that gets bandied around a lot in conversations about Final Fantasy VIII. I don't know if it's underappreciated. I think it's appreciated very well. It's just that when standing in the shadow of two titans, even a giant might seem a little small by comparison. A lot of shade also gets thrown at its protagonist Squall. People seem quite eager to write him off as a moody emo boy who's a bit on the cringe side. I know because I've thrown that kind of shade at him before too. But honestly, Squall is a Chad. He has very good reasons for being the way he is at the start of the game, and undergoes one hell of a transformation throughout the story. So I don't know if Final Fantasy VIII is underappreciated, but I do think it's judged unfairly at times. Now, I'm not arrogant enough to think that I can set the record straight on this one, but if my voice can add something productive to the conversation, then I'll call that a win. And if it happens to mean I get to replay one of my favourite PS1 era games in the process, that's all for the better. However, if I'm going to do even half the justice for this game that I did to 7, I think we should start in a similar fashion to what I did in that video. It's here if you haven't watched it already. So why don't we have a certain young lady cast our minds back, around 25 years? And take a look through the eyes of a younger Arkham, one who was exploring life in the year 2000, and maybe trying to figure out how this game wound up leaving a dent so big that he's still playing it in 2025, and feels the need to commit time and energy to making a video about it. The year 2000 was a time of hopelessly delusional optimism. Whatever people usually think about a new year being their year and how they're going to make big amazing changes in their life was amplified even more by our arbitrary calendar system turning over an even bigger round number. But I get it. It's a rare thing to see the start of a new century, let alone a new millennium. I suspect I'll only see 2 or 3 more before wind erosion finally grinds my old bones into dust. The Y2K bug that was going to see the whole world shut down and burning in nuclear fire had failed to manifest thanks to the miracle of sending out a patch, and 18-year-old Arkham was feeling a lot more comfortable in his own acne-covered skin. My second year of college saw me becoming more relaxed in my new environment and finding more acceptance among my peer group. I was suddenly getting invited to go out drinking, something I was legally allowed to do at that point, and doing a skydive, too actually, as a way to celebrate my big milestone birthday. My creative interests had switched from acting to writing. This was in no small part because I'd spent many a boring work shift daydreaming up self-insert Final Fantasy VII fanfiction, and then tried to edit out the copyrighted stuff so it came off at least halfway original. Oddly enough, I still return to that story every now and then. It's come a long way from where it started, and I'm actually kind of proud of it now. Anyway, I was young, I had free time, and I had my sights set on my first backpacking adventure. While I was saving up for that though, I still had disposable income and a gaming addiction to feed. While 1998 had seen Final Fantasy VII show up on my PC and absolutely blow my mind, I don't think I got to play another JRPG until the PC port of 8 dropped in the year 2000. While the console war has more or less ended with everyone saying, hey, let's just put all our games on each other's systems and make more money that way, back in the early 2000s, gamers were in one of 3 distinct categories. Unless of course you could afford more than one of these systems, I suppose. Each of these platforms offered very different experiences to the other, and most turn-based JRPGs were flocking to the PlayStation for all the same reasons that Square had back when they started work on Final Fantasy VII. So you were either on the PlayStation getting all the JRPGs, Metal Gear and Resident Evil, the N64 playing Zelda and Mario, or the PC playing Unreal and Quake. Oh, also Snake on old Nokia phones. Yeah, that was a thing for a minute there, wasn't it? Change was on the horizon though. Sega was already trying to claw back some of its market share after the failure of the Saturn with the Dreamcast. DVDs were becoming something you'd find in every household, and the greatest game console ever made was looming on the horizon. But the big gaming highlights of Y2K for me were the release of my all-time favourite game Deus Ex, and of course, the PC port of Final Fantasy VIII. I actually remember when the demo appeared on a CD taped to the cover of PC Gamer magazine. You had best believe I got that home as soon as I could, and shoved it into my PC CD drive to sample the goodness hidden within. You can actually find this demo on the web archive even now, and play through both scenes. Just make sure you set the rendering to software mode, or you'll get lots of weird artifacts in the pre-rendered backgrounds. I'd read quite a few articles about the game, and heard things from PlayStation-owning friends who'd played it. The media was portraying it as a love story, and bigging up the dual protagonists of Squall and Laguna, telling their stories across different time periods. The shift in visuals was exciting for me. At the time, while I had no problem with the cutesy SD characters of 7, I didn't have the appreciation for them I have now, so the realistic character designs and even the edgy vibe I was getting from Squall were really appealing to 18-year-old me. Since the game was released in late February, I had only to wait a week or so for my birthday, and I had absolutely no doubt what was inside the PC big box looking present that was handed to me that morning. And once it was mine, it was installed and I was locked in and ready to go. And since I already had a Prima strategy guide to hand to help finding all those obtuse secrets these games hide, I was going all in from the start for this one. The Squaresoft that existed at the time of Final Fantasy VII's launch was a much bigger beast than the one that saw the launch of Final Fantasy VI and Chrono Trigger. They had almost doubled their staff, turning them into one of the largest studios in the world, and opened a second studio in Honolulu. Most of those new people were 3D artists and animators, many of whom had aspirations to work in movies and special effects rather than games. Both the domestic and global success of Final Fantasy VII also meant that the studio had money to spend, a lot of creative people to spend it on, and we were still in an age where telling a good story and building a fun game around that story was considered the best way for game developers to turn any kind of profit. What's that, Sven?
They didn't make it to increase market share. They didn't make it to service a brand. They didn't have to meet arbitrary sales targets or fear being laid off if they didn't meet those targets.
In the time between the release of Final Fantasy VII and the inevitable release of Final Fantasy VIII, Square got to work, putting out a whole slew of games for their new partner's CD-based Wonder Machine, and Hironobu Sakaguchi held the producer title for more than a few of these. Also, the interesting talent pool they'd acquired in recent years had given Sakaguchi a rather interesting idea for a project that was somewhat out of Square's comfort zone. The world was changing, gaming was getting bigger, studios were getting bigger, and developers were pushing the PlayStation's chipset harder and harder, and Sakaguchi wasn't responsible for just one game series anymore. And while he had at least one more truly phenomenal entry to craft, and some forward-thinking ideas on where things should go in the future, it was time for him to take a tentative step back and let the next generation take up the torch. As he said in an interview in Edge magazine, "I wasn't directly involved in Final Fantasy VIII. I left it to another team to develop and let them do what they wanted with it, and take it in their own direction." I mean, imagine being handed the keys to your boss's Mercedes and being told that you could drive it anywhere you wanted, no questions asked, with the assumption that you wouldn't drive it off a cliff, into an ocean, or park it in the Street Fighter II bonus stage, left unsaid but implied. I would be very uncomfortable. Fortunately, Yoshinori Kitase and Tetsuya Nomura weren't exactly strangers to this series themselves. They had both been big players in the development of 5, 6, and 7, and had been listening to a lot of feedback from the new international market about the previous game. They had big ideas, and a mind to take things in a somewhat different direction this time. Shmuplations is an awesome website that translates and posts developer interviews from Japanese gaming magazines, and they've done a bang-up job of translating and presenting an interview that Famitsu did with a variety of people involved in Final Fantasy VIII's development. I fully recommend going over there, reading this for yourself, and maybe checking out the other articles on their website. But from both this resource and the Edge magazine interviews from January 2018, it was very clear that Kitase and Nomura wanted to create a brighter, more upbeat feeling world this time. To quote the interview, Kitase says,
Final Fantasy VII's story was a little gloomy, what with starting you right off in a slum in a dark city without much sunlight. We all really wanted to do something brighter for this next game.
But it's from this idea that telling a game that revolved around a kind of fantastical high school experience came into being. That's not to say that they wanted to create a more mundane world. In the same interview, Kitase says,
We absolutely did not want to make school segments where you do boring, everyday school stuff.
Because, you know, there's no way that would be an entertaining way to spend your time in a AAA RPG. But that was the starting point. Since each Final Fantasy is an open and shut story with a completely unique world, the seemingly limitless possibilities for where to take things must feel overwhelming. Especially when you're trying to follow on from the company's best-selling game of all time and a cultural phenomenon like Final Fantasy VII. In some respects, the easy thing to do would have been to try to keep things as close to what they produced there as possible, and I can fully imagine that's how it would have gone down in modern-day AAA gaming. But as Kitase says,
you see, these games take 2 years to produce, so if we don't set new challenges for ourselves, we can't sustain our motivation throughout the development.
As we'll dive into in more detail later though, this is what saw the team pushing the envelope even harder than before. They decided to use motion capture in their cutscenes this time rather than simply repeat the process they used in the previous game, and tried to push the somewhat more realistic art style that the battles of FF7 had had even harder this time. While Final Fantasy VII and VIII are relatively similar in size and scale, VIII has almost double the number of pre-rendered backgrounds, and their chosen art style is a big reason for that. All in all, from the initial meetings that happened within days of the launch of Final Fantasy VII to its final release, Final Fantasy VIII had a development cycle of around 2 years, and was put together by a team of about 100 people. Kitase laments that there were names on the credits who he simply didn't know. When you think about teams of 30 to 40 people putting together a game on the Super Nintendo, you can see how it would be easy to know the names of most, if not all of the developers on the project. But now teams had departments, and departments had managers who delegated out tasks, and top guys like Kitase and Nomura were no longer in direct contact with every member of the ground staff. In a way, it's a bad omen about where game development was heading. For all their work though, Final Fantasy VIII released in Japan on February 11th, 1999, and made its way to the USA and Europe in September and October of the same year. At the time of release, it was met with high scores across the board and shipped over 3 million copies in its first month in Japan alone. However, for reasons we'll try to unpack later, the test of time has been harsher on this entry than the other two from the PS1 era, and for reasons we're about to dive into, it was also the last to get a real remaster, one that also has fans somewhat divided. The term lazy port or lazy remaster gets thrown around a lot more than I'd like. Certainly I think if a job's worth doing, it's worth doing well. But just because something doesn't meet whatever arbitrary standards you have, doesn't necessarily reflect on how hard someone worked on it. We never actually know the circumstances that teams and studios find themselves in when they have to take on a project like this. Since the majority of the capture you're going to see in this video comes from the Steam release of the Final Fantasy VIII Remaster, and this release is somewhat divisive, I feel we should at least get our facts in order first. I'm not saying you are wrong if you don't like it. It's not my place to tell you what you like or don't like. But I think it's fair to lay down the circumstances under which the remaster happened if we're going to make judgments about its quality. A lot of different reasons and rumours were flying around about why the remaster of VIII was being ignored, even for the game's 20th anniversary back in 2019. These range from the game being perceived as not as important or influential as 7 or 9, to copyright issues about the game's iconic Eyes on Me song performed by Fei Wong. It had been made clear though that a big part of the problems was that the game's source code and a lot of uncompressed art assets were long lost. A world where porting and remastering as a way for publishers to make money by reselling their old games simply wasn't envisioned back in the days of CDs and memory cards. As the graphical arm race pushed closer and closer to the realism we thought we wanted at the time, the idea that, down the line, people would play cleaned up versions of these early 3D games never occurred to studios like Square, let alone that we'd have a massive indie scene that embraced this look as its own art style. So who've worked on a lot of Steam ports and remasters for the retro Final Fantasy games, were working with the compressed files found on the CD. Their first priority was getting the game to run smoothly at resolutions that can be produced on modern monitors. The biggest effort, as far as I can tell anyway, was in repainting all the textures by hand for every 3D asset in the game. Like, look at these. This isn't some AI upscale job or lazy work. A lot of these even have new UV maps to accommodate the new textures. Now, whether or not you like this kind of Kingdom Hearts interpretation of the characters is a matter of personal taste, and I won't hold that against anyone in any way. I personally am okay with it, and in the fully 3D worlds of the battle arenas, these new textures and magic effects, all running at a much higher resolution, really work well together. What's not so good is the pre-rendered backgrounds, and specifically the way the character models look with them. As mentioned, the high-resolution art assets used in the game's original development were long gone, so upscaling was done using the compressed images. This gives some areas a kind of blurry look, but more so, you can really tell in many of the shots that the characters aren't actually in the world space. It's definitely not much better than in Final Fantasy VII on Steam either. I think 9 does the best with this though. It's just something about those old lower resolution characters with blocky pixel edges that just helps sell the illusion better. I guess it's a bit like how they cleaned up all those old Jerry Anderson puppet shows like Thunderbirds for HD, and suddenly it was really easy to see all the puppet strings. As we'll talk about later too, technical limitations limited the number of actual 3D characters the PS1 could render on a screen at any given time. This means that there are scenes where characters are actually baked into the 3D backgrounds, and oh damn have these not come through the filter very well at all. So is this the remaster the world deserves? No, I don't think so. In an ideal world, we'd have had the original assets to work with, which hopefully would have helped with the overall look. I'm not saying I think this is the very best that could have been done either. Again, I only know what I can find from digging around old news articles on the matter. I wasn't in the studio when the big decisions were being made, but I don't for a second think this is lazy or strictly bad. So with that out of the way, let's get into the good stuff and start unpacking the game's story. The beginning of Final Fantasy VIII seems to proactively try to contradict Final Fantasy VII, and I think this was in many ways the right move. Final Fantasy VII introduced the series to a much larger international audience, but that audience needed to get with the program as quickly as possible. That is to say that while there are common themes and mechanics connecting most Final Fantasy games, these are all individual stories that take place in their own unique worlds with their own characters. Yes, that includes the guy named Sid. So where Final Fantasy VII opens in a dark Blade Runner-esque world, 8 opens on a calm beach on a sunny day. While 7 launches you into the action within minutes of hitting the new game button, and your first battle within seconds of taking control of your character, 8 starts in a place of safety and comfort, and takes a while to get you into a fight of any kind. And while 7 kept you in Midgar for 5 to 6 hours before you ever saw the world map, 8 has you out running around the place within like 10 minutes of getting control of Squall. Well, 15 if you want to read everything on your computer screen, and longer if you get hooked on Triple Triad right away. The intro to 7 feels like a writer who's releasing their first book, and has about 2 sentences to grab their audience by the balls and yank on them so hard they can't escape. 8 feels like that same writer has released 3 or 4 books now, and is confident enough that their fans will stick around for a couple of chapters, even when nothing especially interesting seems to be happening. While 8 does show off where the money was spent, things don't really get moving until we are at the Battle of Dolette. This is one of the sections that was featured in the demo of the game, and had they wanted to, they absolutely could have started the game here to thrust us into a much more intense opening. That being said, let's rewind a little bit and take a look at this opening cinematic, because aside from Nobu Uematsu just blowing us out of the water with this music here, and finally bringing actual vocals into it, a lot of things happen. It also shows off just how much better Square's 3D artists and video creators have gotten with the tech since they made that previous game. Good water simulations aren't easy even now, so the fact that it looked this good back then is showing off not only the tech, but the skills of the people using it. The intro is something of a tour de force of the game's big events. You don't really know what most of the stuff you see here means, but between the music and the fact this is Final Fantasy, you are swept along and excited to see these strange, ominous floating words in the sky, and the field full of blossoms dancing in the wind, before we focus on our female lead and watch as one pink blossom becomes a white feather before rising off into the sky. Then the scene changes to darker tones, and a strange new weapon comes spiraling to earth, and a hand takes it up. We also see the vision of the woman we know to be our enemy this time, some kind of powerful sorceress, but we have little time to contemplate her existence before we see our hero Squall clashing in battle with his rival Seifer. The nature of this conflict has yet to be revealed, but we're getting a hell of a show with a fully motion and facial captured battle between these two, and it is relentless. The conflict ends when Seifer slashes open Squall's face, and he responds in kind, before highlighting the focus on our hero and heroine coming together as a major focus of the game. What we discover from the opening scenes though, is that Squall and Seifer were actually engaged in a training bout, but Seifer decided to take things too far, and because Squall was wounded outside of turn-based combat, he needs a doctor, bandages, and will have a cool scar for the rest of his life, versus just popping an X potion and walking it off. He also has something of an odd experience when a figure only visible as a reflection in the glass comes to say hi. What we gather from these opening minutes though, is that we are students in a kind of military academy called Garden. I especially like our introduction to this place though, how the camera pulls out from the pre-rendered background and the place just suddenly comes alive. And the music? I mean, the only way I can describe it would be to say, it feels like the soundtrack to Coming Home. Garden trains a special kind of soldier for hire called Seeds. And Seeds are special because they work with and using Guardian forces. These are rare kinds of monster that, if bested in combat, will share their power with someone and grant them all kinds of abilities, as well as let them call them down in a fight. There's a bit of flavor text later in the game about how a genius named Dr. Odin actually manufactured the whole system, but I prefer to think of it as just symbiosis between Seeds and their GFs. Squall is a senior student at this academy, and today, he, Seifer, and a few others will be taking their final field exam that will see them inserted into live combat to fight alongside fully graduated and battle-hardened Seeds. Seifer has apparently failed this test a few times now. Can't imagine why. We are introduced to a couple of other characters here, and I must say, I really like how all the main squad get their own personalised CG intros this time. We first meet Squall's homeroom teacher Quistis, and later our overly enthusiastic martial arts expert Zell. We get some idea as to all these guys' personalities, which we'll drill down deeper to in the character section, but suffice to say, our first impressions show our boy Squall here is the strong loner type, and Seifer is the hot-headed, too cool for school type who specialises in getting under people's skin. Neither of these are an ideal fit for a well-disciplined, team-focused military organisation, but Squall at least seems willing to put his personal feelings aside to get the job done like a professional. Before the big battle can take place though, Squall needs to run out to the fire cave with Instructor Quistis to defeat and claim a Guardian force all for himself. Apparently, this should have been done some time ago, but Squall is clearly a typical university student who'd rather spend all his time playing the Elder Scrolls Oblivion, and then write his whole dissertation the night before it's due to be handed in, and barely scrape a pass. Or was that just me? So after completing what is basically a tutorial dungeon and winning over the respect and compliance of Ifrit, we rush back to the garden to get an impassioned good luck speech from none other than the headmaster himself. Sid, not that one, this one, Kramer. I swear that's the only time I'll do that joke in this video. Then we pile onto a boat where we finally get our mission briefing. For reasons unknown, Galbadia, something of a military state with a reputation for throwing its weight around, has attacked and invaded the Duchy of Dolet, a small independent nation to its east. The actual politics of this area are never explained and aren't all that important. The main point is that after several days of fighting, the Dolet army have been pushed out of the city and are regrouping in the mountains. So Seed has been hired to drive Galbadia out, and they are using this as an opportunity to put their potential new bloods to their final test. After being divided into squads, with Seifer assigned as a squad leader, I'm already questioning the management of this place. They board the ship that takes them into the war zone, and from there, it's full steam ahead into what we've been waiting for. In one interview I read, Yoshinori Kitase mentioned that he watched Saving Private Ryan during the development of this game, and found himself wondering if video games would ever be able to tell stories that powerful. I don't know if they had this landing sequence planned out by the time he saw it, but it sure does feel inspired, doesn't it? The whole sequence just gets your pulse absolutely racing, and it's a shame we have to stop and mess around in menus before we can charge up the beach, into the city, and get into the action. While there are several battles before we reach the town square, Seifer, Squall and Zell soon find themselves face to face with one of the very harsh realities of war, waiting around for something to happen. For a really long time. Seifer especially is almost sociopathic in his desire to get into a fight, so it's no surprise when a small unit of Galbadian soldiers who've slipped into the city go sneaking through the square that Seifer decides to disobey his orders, abandon his post, and go hunting after them. While Zell protests, pointing out this isn't just a battle but an important exam, Squall doesn't exactly disagree with Seifer's judgment. Climbing the mountain to the communications tower, where the soldiers went though, brings them into the path of monsters who nest in this area. Seifer continues to demonstrate his overall lack of discipline here, constantly running off ahead and always looking for trouble. So when a transfer student, here to take the test, shows up to relay the order to withdraw to the team, the leader is nowhere to be seen. This merry chase takes them all the way to the top of the communications tower, where we discover the Galbadians fixing it? Pretty weird really. Not something that warrants a full-scale armed invasion if I say so myself, but maybe that's why I'm at my computer writing lukewarm takes on PlayStation 1 games and not in charge of any kind of military superpower. This whole affair ends with our first 2 real boss fights. First on the top of the tower, and then another one as we withdraw from the battle. I know you can take this thing down, and I did multiple times back when all I had was the demo to play, but it is absolutely worth just running for it for how it plays out. Oh god, step on me. The good news is our team all make it home safe and sound and pass their exam. That is, all except for Seifer again, who disobeyed a direct order and... well, the guy is an ass, and he isn't suited to a military career, that's for sure. That being said, he demonstrates something like humility when he steps up and leads the applause for all the students who passed. And with that, our 2 best boys and 1 best girl get to attend their graduation ball, which is where all this has really been heading. Because it's there that our broody loner is going to meet the woman who will change his life forever. The dance scene was given a lot of attention from the developers, and while it might seem like nothing more than a formality for Squall to stand around and feel awkward at, it's the night that sees him come into contact with 2 of the most important women in his life, though he doesn't know it at the time. This is also the defining moment of the game, a scene that you can look at and go, ah, that's what we're doing this time. Similar to the opening of 15 that sees 4 friends pushing a car down a road and making fun of each other while Stand By Me plays in the background. It just captures the essence of the game in a single moment. The first of these women is Rinoa Hartley, the girl who sees our overly stoic protagonist doing his best to be asocial from across the room and decides to either make or ruin his night depending on how you look at it. Their first interaction is kinda cute, and ends with this slight young girl somehow dragging a tall, muscular young man with a lifetime of combat training, who spars with T-Rexes no less, into the middle of the dance floor. You cannot convince me he wasn't actually going along with this. And while our boy is stiff and awkward at the start, he can really pull out some moves when he wants to. This encounter is over all too quickly though, when our lovely young girl spots the people she's actually been looking for and gives our boy a reassuring pat before marching off and leaving him back with his thoughts. The second big encounter happens in the training area. There's something of a known secret here, a place where all the students hang out after curfew. Apparently, navigating monster-infested territory is totally worth a late night chat with your bros around here. Quistis brings Squall out here for an intimate unburdening of her own, to reveal she'll be relinquishing her instructor status, placing her and Squall at basically the same rank in the business and hoping he takes the hint. He doesn't. On their way back, Squall notices another young woman, one who he seemed to recall spoke to him in the doctor's office before the exam. This odd familiarity he has, combined with the fact she calls them both by name, and the no doubt massive insurance risk connected to having a guest at the garden becoming mangled by an oversized wasp, sees Squall and Quistis leap into action together, and when it's all over, the bodyguards of this young lady, men in strange uniforms, escort her out of the part of the garden that's infested with carnivorous magic-using beasts, to literally any other place on the premises. And with graduation out of the way, Squall, Zell and Selphie will have a whole night to rest in their new quarters, because the very next day, they'll get their first assignment. And it's a doozy. Now, strictly speaking, the garden is an apolitical business. They may have some kind of code of conduct, but they are generally available to be contracted by anyone who can pay the fee. So, in stark contrast to the massive beach assault we took part in for the final exam, Squall, Zell and Selphie have been assigned to bolster a resistance group in a place called Timber. Who their enemies are and what they've been contracted to do isn't explained. Only how they are to get into contact with this group, and that they should follow their orders once they've done so. It's explained that this job is something of a special case, but the specifics of that are above Squall's pay grade. One thing I appreciate about this particular world map over those in the other games is the basic infrastructure that we can see operating there. On the way to Balam to depart for the exam, we got to drive a car over some roads, and this time we'll actually be riding a train. What's more, Seeds get their own private sleeper car, and Selphie absolutely loves these things. Man, I hope she never runs into a guy named Sabin. I don't think they get along at all. Awkward crossover fanfiction aside, things get turned upside down when on their way to the destination, the three new Seeds are suddenly overcome by some kind of strange noise. This transitions them into a kind of shared dream where, Squall in particular, dreams himself to be a much cooler, more interesting character, possessed of an actual personality. Put your pitchforks down, I already told you I love Squall. But at the start of his character arc, he's not all that interesting or endearing, and that's very much by design, so the change of pace is appreciated. As the music ramps up to battle level, we see three soldiers dressed in the uniform of the Galbadian military. These could be no different from any of the other grunts we murked in the field exam, save for the fact they aren't wearing helmets and don't conform to a single character model. Ladies and gentlemen, may I present the fabled second protagonist of Final Fantasy VIII. This is Laguna. This is Kiros, and this is Ward, and they are on some kind of mission to... They are lost. They apparently had some objective to fight the army of Timber, missed that left turn at Albuquerque, and Laguna, clearly not accustomed to how the military deals with people who flee from battlefields, has decided, to hell with it, they're going home. Our other three heroes seem somewhat aware that they've become passengers in the heads of these guys, and we see their internal monologues around the screen. It's only a matter of seconds though before the first battle starts, and we can forget about literally everything other than rocking out to one of the best battle themes in all of Final Fantasy. The weird thing here is that we don't seem to learn anything relevant to our character's situation. The fact that the Galbadian army is attacking the Timber army implies that the resistance we're meeting up with is opposed to them, but that's pretty much all we learn as Laguna and his boys drive off into the sunset and head straight for their favourite drinking hole. In fact, they are specifically here to see a performance by a piano player named Julia. The lads egg Laguna on to actually talk to this woman who he is clearly deeply infatuated with. In complete contrast to Squall, who was so closed off he probably gets ads for BetterHelp on every YouTube video he watches, Laguna wears his heart very much on his sleeve. He's just kind of a big dunce about it. Poor guy. I respect the effort though, and it turns out, so does she. Far from striking out completely, Laguna actually receives an invitation to join the lovely Julia for a private drink in her room, where she confesses she noticed him coming to see her play and just wanted a chance to talk to him while looking into his pretty eyes. Nervous, uptight Laguna doesn't take too long to come out of his shell and start yapping her ear off about army life, his friends, war and all his hopes and dreams, and the young lady seems quite captivated by him. The red wine probably helps, though it also quickly knocks him out. Towards the end of the conversation though, Julia confesses she's had a desire to write and sing her own songs for a long time, but has never felt confident about her lyrics. And yet, something about Laguna's story has sparked a flame inside her. All the different sides of him he's shown her in one night have made her want to try, to be brave, to surpass her own limits. This interaction is ended by Kiros shouting up that they have new orders and need to prepare to ship out again. Laguna promises he'll come back to see Julia, and in that moment the dream or vision or whatever it is ends, and our three Seeds wake up back on their train, having been roused by the announcement that they're arriving in Timber, and very quickly discover that they all had the same dream, but from slightly different perspectives. Arriving in Timber with a very strange train ride on their mind, the three Seeds adopt to compartmentalize this until a time where it could be more useful. They meet up with their contact and get taken aboard a train that operates as the mobile base for the Forest Owls Resistance Group. Apparently, there are a lot of groups that like to meet up and talk about how they're really going to resist Galbadia and push them out of Timber for good, but the Owls are one of the few seemingly willing to put their money where their mouth is. They come across as young, idealistic, and basically incompetent, however, which may explain their completely insane plan to kidnap the president of Galbadia. Before any of that can be explained though, someone needs to go wake the princess, a job nobody seems to want. Squall obliges them as their paying clients, but makes it clear that they are Special Forces operatives, not errand runners. The princess in question turns out to be none other than Squall's mysterious dance partner, the lovely Rinoa Hartley. It would be nice to chalk this one up to fate, but the truth is, Rinoa was working at the graduation ball. She wanted to meet with Sid personally and appeal her case to enlist seeds to her cause at a discount rate. Squall just happened to help her get a better read of the room. Quite the little manipulator we have here. Adorable reunions aside, it's time to explain the situation to the team and get this operation moving. The Owls have come into possession of information that President Deiling of Galbadia, a man they describe as not a real president but a dictator, who isn't even considered popular by his own people, will be arriving in Timber by train sometime soon, and when they are about to reveal their big plan, Selphie demonstrates exactly why she's my favourite Final Fantasy girl. She's really into blowing stuff up. They've concocted an elaborate scheme to literally switch out the president's train car with a copy containing a dummy president so they can ride off into the sunset with the real president and presumably make demands, all while the soldiers and guards on the train are completely oblivious to this fact. Now, I know that there is a certain Saturday morning cartoon logic to Final Fantasy VII as well, but oh my god, this one is pretty out there. I mean, it's no more absurd than summoning dragons, I guess, but all things considered, I'd have probably gone with Selphie's plan. The actual operation is pretty cool though, and the cutscenes are all awesome. The Owls are denied their place in Timber's history, however, when they discover they've only picked up a decoy, and one that is quite capable of dealing with resistance members dumb enough to go after it. Fortunately for all concerned though, 3 well-trained and powerful Seed members weren't exactly taken into consideration, and tragedy is avoided. The President's real destination and intentions, it seems, are to head to Timber's television broadcasting station so he can make an announcement to the world by broadcasting over radio waves. This is one of those odd little world building moments we get here that isn't really elaborated on. Basically, all public broadcasts in this world are handled by HD cable. Galbadia launching an assault on Dolette was a way to get their broadcast tower up and running again to spread some kind of message. Selphie is once again hopelessly optimistic about what it could be. At this point, the Owls squat down on the floor to come up with a new plan, leading Squall to step up and ask about the specifics of their contractual obligations here. They did just perform a near-death train kidnapping, and had to fight off some kind of mutated decoy after all. Rinoa hands to Squall a copy of the contract that reads like stereo instructions, before handing him the Reader's Digest version that more or less says these 3 are tied to the Owls until either Timber is freed from Galbadian oppression, or they become casualties of the resistance. Squall doesn't exactly take this well. While these guys are all similar in age to him, he's clearly looking at kids playing freedom fighters with no actual combat experience, and is quite sure he and his comrades are going to become casualties of their incompetence long before any actual freedom fighting gets done. Disagreements aside, the Owls decide to make a stealthy approach on the station to broadcast their own message of defiance right in the face of whatever President Deiling has in mind. Unfortunately, things go from bad to utterly terrible the moment the camera starts rolling. To begin with, the President announces a desire to end all wars by settling his outstanding disagreements with all other nations. Maybe Selphie was right all along. However, he follows this up by saying that Galbadia's new ambassador is none other than the sorceress. Before the implications of this can be elaborated on though, for reasons unknown, Seifer comes crashing into the building to take President Deiling hostage, and Quistis arrives on the scene to inform the Timber team that they've been roped into dealing with this now. Arriving at what has now become a hostage negotiation, Seifer acts like he's just finishing the job Squall and his team were recruited to do, and in the process, broadcast members of Seed seemingly taking political action against Galbadia to the entire world. Seifer retreats into a back room, and this is the moment our enemy makes her first appearance. Uematsu once again knocked it out of the park with the sorceress theme. It's just as chilling as Sephiroth's, but in its own unique way. Speaking like a caring mother talking to a child, the sorceress is already inside Seifer's mind, both playing with his insecurities and manipulating him to do her bidding like she's Obi-Wan Kenobi. The president is released, and Seifer seems to, quite willingly, follow the sorceress to somewhere. So, I think that's about as far as we can take it for what you might think of as a spoiler-free setup. We've been introduced to our heroes, our villains, and we've got a hint of the main conflict, and even something strange going on with that odd Laguna flashback. We'll be battling both the Galbadian army, and of course this mysterious sorceress, all throughout the main conflict. And all too soon, our team of newly graduated seeds will be tasked with her assassination. Of course, we do need to tackle the more spoilery plot points to get at the themes, and we'll do that in the character section, and especially when we uncover the true villains of the piece. But in the interest of not turning anyone away from the video just yet, let's drift into lighter topics for a moment. I've talked quite a lot about Final Fantasy world maps before, and while I want my reviews to be accessible even to people who are seeing me for the first time, I'm going to suggest you take a look at my videos on either 7 or 9 to get my take on world map mechanics. The TLDR is, I love them, I miss them, and I wish they'd remained a part of the series. So let's get into something specific to this world. You wouldn't think it, considering all the spells you fire off on an average game, but Final Fantasy VIII is what you might think of as a low magic setting. That is to say, magic isn't something that people can usually do in this world. It's not a product like in 7, and humans, for the most part, aren't capable of casting spells at all. We do see some human enemies using simple spells, but we can chalk this up to some kind of basic training like Witcher signs, or technology like Palmer's Mako gun. Our seeds are only able to use magic because of their connection to their guardian forces. And even then, they have to literally suck the spells out of the different monsters and creatures they encounter in order to build up a stock of this power to either plug into their own stats or throw back at a different enemy. There are plot reasons why guardian forces aren't a standard tool in any military's arsenal, but also the technology of this world is much further ahead than in just about any other Final Fantasy before it, including 7. In fact, when we do eventually visit Galbadia Garden, you can see they've got anti-gravity exoskeletons that they train in and use for combat, and the seeds here, apparently, prefer using these to GFs anyway. We also have scenes later where we can see the Galbadian military is no stranger to using these technologies either. Magitech and technology in general had been creeping its way into Final Fantasy for a while, but as a way to highlight the fantasy side of Final Fantasy, Kitase wanted to use a design he'd seen Nomura make a couple of games back that had never been used. This was the sorceress. He was interested in playing with the idea of advanced technology coming up against a pure mystical power, which is, well, it's kinda Star Wars, isn't it? 8 certainly isn't trying to be Star Wars, unlike a certain other Final Fantasy game, but they're clearly drawing from the same inspiration pool. There are actually multiple sorceresses in the game from different time periods. It's not really a spoiler, as it was mentioned in the game's promotional material, so I'll drop it here. But the visions concerning Laguna actually take place many years before Squall and his team were even born. In a later flashback, Laguna and the Galbadian army are fighting the army of Estar in what is referred to as the Sorceress War in Squall's time. Estar was run by a previous sorceress named Adele, and she had designs to bend the world to her will. When the story was in its earlier stages, there was an idea of a good sorceress in the west and an evil one in the east, and I think we can all guess what inspired that. This basic idea still exists in the finished game, but it's not as prominent a feature as it was when the story was first drafted. We don't actually know where the power of the sorceress comes from, only that once it existed, it had to be passed on before the previous sorceress could die, meaning short of one of them being blasted into the sun, not impossible as we'll see soon, there's always going to be one around. These women seem to live more isolated lives, as while a sorceress is a person and therefore could have any kind of personality, the ones that have used their world-bending powers to subjugate entire nations have given the entire sorority something of a bad reputation. The southern Centra continent is something of a blasted wasteland that doesn't have any towns or cities on it. Instead, we have just one ruin that seems to come from a long time before the events of the game. This ruin is infested with tomberries, and also home to one of the most powerful Guardian forces, Odin. Whatever purpose this place served in whatever ancient culture that gathered here is seemingly lost forever. Not just because of the usual time and erosion that makes figuring out what actually happened a mere 2,000 years ago in our world difficult, but because of a near extinction level event called the Lunar Cry that befell this land and everything that once lived upon it. In Final Fantasy VII, a monster was separated from an animal as something abnormally irradiated by Mako energy, either from a natural lifestream spring or a Shinra reactor. Alien cells were also a part of mutating the most dangerous ones. In this game, monsters come from the moon. Again, we don't know much beyond that's just the way it is, and this isn't the first Final Fantasy where this was the case. It's also entirely possible that, even with the current technologies available to observe the moon, the people here know absolutely nothing about how life arrived on and later evolved there. I suspect it's just a tiny bit dangerous to go there too. The Lunar Cry is an event that may occur naturally like other disasters, but can also be orchestrated thanks to an artifact called the Lunatic Pandora. So, a box that should never be opened, linked to the moon. It seems to be something that was created by an ancient sorceress to summon the monsters to the planet. Why you'd want to do that, I don't know. But suffice to say, its effects are devastating. This seems to be the reason for the abundance of monsters on the planet even now, and is one of the bedtime stories that children are told about sorceresses to get them to sleep at night, and leave them with a somewhat prejudiced view of these women into their adulthood. The world map is actually divided into nations, and while we don't know too much about their individual politics, we know that Galbadia is the bad one because they're basically authoritarian. As before, it would seem we're just visiting the towns and cities of these nations that are important to the story. The map is connected up by trains this time. These run all over the world, and you can jump on them, just like you can any train, by going to a station and waiting around for it to show up. It's not a mechanic I use that much, but it's one I appreciated for the immersion nonetheless. When you're making oldie-timey fantastical worlds that have to be traversed on either foot or giant yellow chickens, the idea of small settlements separated by miles upon miles of monster-infested untamed forest makes sense. But once you start pushing the vibe into something more modern, you'd expect to see things like roads with cars driving along them, as well as trains or other useful forms of public transport. In terms of interesting locations, the Shumi village is one of my favourites, especially because it's completely optional. I don't want to beat a dead horse exactly, but I miss this kind of content in games. These days, the developers are so scared of you missing or choosing to ignore something that they'll beat you over the head with objective markers and busy work until you visited every one of their exquisitely handcrafted locations, and you won't have anything to stumble into on your replay. Having places like the Shumi village and even Wutai in 7 helps create a sense of wonder and mystery, and makes the game feel less focused on you and what you're doing at all times. I also think it's very cool that there's actually another sentient species on the planet, albeit one that secludes itself in one subterranean village. Their home is located in the far north of the map, but they live deep below the surface. They are the only non-seed members to acknowledge the existence of a draw point in any way, implying some connection to magic that humans without GFs or sorceress powers don't have. They are master artisans, which is how they've managed to construct this underground paradise to live in, and their craft is the main reason they have contact with the outside world, as we discover from this guy, who was very inspired by one of his own adventures to the surface. The Shumi are passionate creatures, and the passions of others inspire them to make their works and make it to the best of their ability. They pour a piece of their soul into their craft and try to make each piece a one-of-a-kind thing of beauty. They also undergo a physical transformation at a certain point in their lives. A very small number of them will become elders and go on to lead their community, but others become Moombas. Squall and the others see this as something of a loss, as Moombas seem like simplistic animals to them when compared to the intelligent artisans that they start out as. But the Shumi revere the Moombas. They see this change as a shedding away of all things unnecessary, and the Shumi's inner nature, along with their passions and zest for life, becoming manifest in their physical appearance. Given the way most Moombas we encounter outside of the Shumi village are treated, however, it's little wonder the Shumi cut themselves off. We also get a look at what happens when a Shumi goes bad, when we later meet the Garden Master, Norg. He's the big investor behind the organisation, and he's not just expecting a return on his investment, but for that return to keep growing and adding to his already exorbitant wealth. He exists in a kind of pod secluded beneath the garden, and only seems to want more wealth for the sake of having more. And yeah, not all that flattering really. Now, who does this remind me of? I think the city of Estar needs a special mention as well. You see, the last Sorceress War ended quite abruptly when the Sorceress just disappeared one day, and no one has really heard a peep out of Estar since, despite once holding the whole world in a grip of terror. They're even referred to as xenophobic, which, I'm scared of xenomorphs, so I'm not seeing the issue. They also can't be reached by any conventional means. The train line that runs there is closed, and the continent has natural barriers that can't be breached by any available vehicle, meaning the guys basically have to walk along the tracks just to reach the continent. Estar is clearly far more technologically advanced than any other nation on the planet, and even when you see the place in flashbacks to the time of the previous Sorceress War, this still seems to be the case. Maybe having a sorceress who can end you in exotic ways, or use her magic to do far worse to you than that, is actually a really good incentive for advancement. It also helps that they have the eccentric Dr. Odin working among them, who's something of an all-around genius and inventor. There's a kind of Willy Wonka thing here where Estar is closed up and, as we discover, covered by a cloaking device so nobody can come in, but Dr. Odin products are shipped out to the world from here somehow. Estar's size, just on the world map alone, is absolutely massive, much bigger than Midgar in Final Fantasy VII, and it has a Fantastic Four Jetsons utopian vision of the future aesthetic. It's very, very blue is what I'm saying. Both Daling City in Galbadia and Estar have public transport to get you from point A to point B. To help create a sense of scale in these areas, there are quite a few screens that don't serve a particular purpose other than to stretch out the walking time between 2 points of interest. In Galbadia, you can jump on buses that will take you around the place, and Estar has these cool floating chairs that go whizzing through these glass tubes. Whee! Arriving here really feels like arriving in another world. It's as far removed from the rest of the environments in this game as Wutai is from Midgar, and the spectacle you get hit with when you arrive is well worth the build-up. Not only that though, Estar has a space program, and not just sending a dude into space one time like Shinra. No, these guys have a massive, inhabitable space station orbiting the planet with artificial gravity, and they can literally load people into a giant cannon and launch them up to it. Even the president gets up there now and then. In some ways, it's a good job that whoever is running this place, now that Sorceress Adele is out of the picture, is more interested in fixing domestic problems and Estar's reputation post-war, because they'd have no problem steamrolling the rest of the world with the kind of technology they've got here. A lot of this is chalked up to Dr. Odin, but that's not really how science works. The various advances Estar has made are in vastly different fields of science, and while Odin is clearly somewhat eccentric and prefers spending time with his work than people, there's no way he alone is responsible for all of this. Anyway, Estar and a couple of other locations we haven't talked about yet are critical plot locations, so while we could talk more about those things now, let's wait until we pull the curtain all the way back on the story. For now though, why don't we make a few friends? According to Yoshinori Kitase, while most Final Fantasy games focus on ensemble casts with their own backstory and personal stake in the outcome of the plot, Final Fantasy VIII was focused specifically on its leading man and woman from the start, with the rest of the cast simply being there as support. That being said, there are actually 2 leading men who start out in significantly different places and even times, and have character arcs of their own. The rest of these guys though, well, most of them get a moment or two in the spotlight, but we don't get deep tragic backstories on a par with the likes of Vincent or Barrett, and I think this is somewhat to the game's detriment. Certainly, there's more than enough content here, and it takes about the same amount of time to clear this game as it does the previous one, but there is a very clear cutoff point where Irvine, Quistis, Zell and Selphie take a big step back so that the spotlight can shine brightly on Squall and Rinoa. Let's start with the basic introductions though. Far from being a ragtag band of adventurers thrust together by the tides of fate, our team are all soldiers raised, trained and employed by the same military academy. In keeping with the high school drama theme that formed the original basis for the story, Tetsuya Nomura suggested that the team all be members of the same class and all start together. However, this idea was shelved to create opportunities for players to meet the new characters as the journey progressed, so that they can get excited about who these new people are and what they're bringing to the table. Since 8, just like 7, is a classless system, the only new mechanics each character brings will be their limit break, as all these characters have seed training, and none of them come with any Guardian forces of their own preloaded, and thus all have to sponge off Squall. However, we can still enjoy learning about who they are and seeing how they interact with each other. We are introduced to Squall first, and then his instructor Quistis. Quistis is one of the reasons I feel the game's tighter focus on the romantic leads is a net negative overall, and it's not just that I've got the hots for slightly older women in positions of authority. She is actually quite a complex and interesting character, and unfortunately, we only ever get to scratch the surface of that. Quistis is only a year older than Squall, but being something of a garden prodigy, she graduated from her training at the age of 15, meaning that by 15, this girl had actual blood on her hands. Well, it might not have been human. Seeds also get contracted to deal with monsters, but still, that's damn impressive and kind of scary. After a couple of years of active duty, she became elevated to instructor level, which is where things became a bit of a challenge. You see, Quistis is dealing with the duality of being at once someone in a position of authority, and also a teenager of more or less the same age as her students. This led to her being something of a soft touch with her class, and when you've got unruly students like Seifer, who will openly disrespect you in your classroom, that's going to create some problems, especially when you consider this is an academy that trains magically empowered mercenaries. However, I sort of get it. While she was no doubt a lot more dedicated to her studies than the other kids, Quistis is still young enough to know exactly what her students are going through subjectively. We may joke about how teenagers with a bag full of homework, insecurities about dating, and not enough time to play Mario Party don't have any real problems, but from their perspective, all this stuff really matters. They live in a much smaller world with far more limited peer groups, so that next test that isn't going to have any bearing on what job they get in the future at all is going to feel huge to them, even if they will be laughing about how silly it was 10 years from now. So while Quistis has been exposed to a wider world of responsibilities, she's going to be a lot more relatable than older teachers. This has led to her developing something of a fan club who treat her not unlike a school idol, and I'm not sure if that's adorable or creepy. Quistis is especially interested in Squall though. Not romantically. Well, kinda. We'll get to that. She clearly sees his determination and raw ability in battle, but is also concerned about how cut off he is from his peers. She attempts to make some connection with him at a few points in the early game, but none more intimate than after his graduation dance. Quistis orders Squall to meet her in the secret area in the training center. It's a place students go to hang out after curfew. While Squall isn't exactly thrilled with the prospect, he obeys and meets her there, where she reveals she's been demoted from instructor back to the level of regular seed. Apparently, after a year as an instructor, she'd been found lacking in the leadership department. For a girl with so much potential, who is clearly used to succeeding at what she sets out to do, this must be one hell of a devastating blow, though it's not as big of a failure as her attempt to open up to Squall is. He gives her a very curt dismissal before piecing out of the whole scene. I know she'll probably take this hard on herself, but honestly, if a beautiful woman invites someone to a secluded location just to open up to them and try to get closer, and that person doesn't take the hint, well, it's a them problem, not a her problem. We have more light to shine on Quistis, and indeed all the crew a little later, but for now let's jump to our next team member, the ever-bubbly Selphie. On the way to the lobby, we bump into Selphie, who's an exchange student from another garden in a place called Trabia. She's the bubbly Genki member of the team who unironically uses tee-hee in conversations, loves trains, and has a fascination with blowing stuff up. Our initial meeting with her serves as a kind of guide to what each location in the garden is for, and how we can fast travel to them using the garden directory. After this first meeting though, she joins back up with us when she's assigned to deliver the extraction order to Squall's squad, and winds up chasing them up the mountains to the radio tower when she discovers they've abandoned their post. which is where she makes her somewhat fumbling entrance. Still, she's certainly fearless and willing to dive headfirst into battles. Selphie is both eager and capable, despite looking like your average kawaii Japanese girl. After transferring, she immediately got involved with the Garden Festival Committee to help put on the annual concert, something she's become heavily invested in, and also began a blog that she shared openly with the school to talk about her new school life and how she's adjusting to suddenly being so far away from all her friends and having to basically start again from zero in a new place. The first entry reads, "Booyaka! It's a lingo I want to spread." Yeah, we're back to old guys writing what they think young people should sound like. Well, it was the 90s, and I guess we were all kinda lame back then. Though the writers do seem somewhat aware of this when they start a later entry with, "Booyaka! No one's using it." The journal offers a general recap of what happened throughout the game, punctuated with lots of tee-hees and woohoos that go a long way towards making Selphie very endearing. There's also one of the only pieces of foreshadowing about a very important upcoming plot point that we're going to have to tackle later. Another Selphieism is her infatuation with Laguna, or Sir Laguna as she likes to call him. She sees him as some dashing knight from a dream, and even keeps a small shrine to him on the Balam Garden servers. This also serves as a bit of extra backstory about our long-haired automatic weapons enthusiast. You see, when he retired from his military life, Laguna becomes something of a travel writer for an old magazine called Timbermaniacs. We can find these all over the world, and everyone we pick up will unlock another of Selphie's overly embellished interpretations of Laguna's adventures for us to read. She also gets way too excited when she finally gets to meet him later in the game. Kinda like meeting your favourite singer or something. Selphie's big moments though are concerning where she grew up. Garden's battle with Galbadia and the sorceress leads to Galbadia using its military might to launch missiles at both Balam and Trebia Garden. Trebia is literally just a school though. Selphie explains in her blog that all students of Trebia have to come to Balam to take their final test, and any looking to become seeds after graduation are transferred to Balam. The place is just completely defenseless. Well, I kind of wonder why they don't have instructors all junctioned up with dragons and other mythological titans that can blow the missile barrage out of the sky, but if we analysed every plot hole in this overly convoluted tale, we'd probably be here all day. Let's just assume that those things aren't kept in Trebia because they're limited and therefore only used by seeds involved in active field operations. Selphie sees the place she grew up in reduced to rubble, and has to deal with that while still keeping enough of her wits about her to try and sabotage the next launch at Balam Garden and allow Squall to get there and mount some kind of defense. Something like this perhaps? Nah, not even close. I suppose she can be forgiven a little glee at blowing up an entire missile base, given what those missiles just did to her former home, and likewise, the people here who inputted all those commands and made it possible are equally guilty in her eyes. The story and conflict pulls everyone along like a speeding train though, and Selphie is forced to compartmentalise her feelings until a moment of respite finally opens up and the team are able to visit Trebia and check in with the survivors there. It's here we see who she is to the people at that garden. She's not only overjoyed to find survivors trying to make the best of the situation, but they are just as thrilled to see that she's alive and doing very well. She even goes so far as to make up fairy tales about a teddy bear to help some of the younger students feel better. Her personality is just infectious and seems to win over everyone, even to the point of having the team womanizer Irvine become completely infatuated with her. Though there's more to that than we first realise. Probably my favourite Selphie moment is on the Ragnarok when, during a conversation Squall is having with other team members, the ship starts flying and Zell says, "I hope this ain't the case, but I can picture Selphie in the pilot seat," before Quistis adds, Selphie screaming, "Woohoo, we're flying." And what do you think we see when we get up there? Sasuga, Selphie-chan. Sa-su-ga. We link up with the closest thing Squall has to a best bro in this story during the Seed Field exam. Zell is the Garden's martial arts master. It honestly baffles me that the likes of Seifer even dare to so much as look at Zell in a way he might not like, given that he stands up to all the monsters that any of the other seeds do with just his bare fists. Like, we all get so hyped about Sabin suplexing Doomtrain, but no one wants to acknowledge that Zell Dinch will literally run around the planet in a matter of seconds just to build up enough momentum to punch the most dangerous monster in the world in the groin. Or just casually headbutt a tank, and the tank will be the one worse for wear. His design gives him a somewhat Mike Tyson inspired face tattoo, but I'm not sure if this is supposed to mean anything or not. We never learn anything about the culture of this world and its attitude towards tattoos, so it's hard to say if this is some kind of social rebellion a mark he took as part of his training, or just something cool that Nomura drew on his face. It's certainly no secret that Japanese society isn't a big fan of tattoos in general because of the long-held stigma about their connection to organised crime. While I do see more young Japanese people these days with tattoos, there are still a lot of hot springs and other establishments that will insist on tattoos being covered or just straight up not allow people with tattoos to enter. Even Western society prefers tattoos that can be covered in many professions, so getting that done to your face, as well as just being damn painful, is something of a rebellion against societal norms and a rejection of the kinds of careers and social circles where they wouldn't be acceptable. Zell sorta reminds me of Poochie from Itchy and Scratchy. I mean, he's not that cringe, but the spiky hair, the face tattoo, the riding on a hoverboard around the school, it all feels like someone my age trying to design a character that kids will find cool. By the way, not letting us ride this thing in some kind of minigame? Total missed opportunity. Zell isn't as superficial as he might seem at first though. While he doesn't have too much in the way of big character moments, and his strongest personality trait seems to be his desire to eat hot dogs, we do get to visit his home and even meet his mother in the town of Balam. Zell grew up here, and his mother is something of a pillar of the community, making him very well known. We can visit his house and even go into his room. He's pretty protective of it, but under certain circumstances, we're allowed up there. We discover that Zell was inspired by his grandfather, who was a soldier himself, who most likely fought during the previous Sorceress War. Zell joined Garden and became a Seed to follow in his footsteps. When Balam comes under Galbadian occupation, the residents there are expecting Zell to be the one to show up and clear them out. And in a scene where the characters are imprisoned and stripped of their weapons, Zell is the one who busts them out because it's his hands that are his weapons. Well, actually, it's the powerful monsters he's magically connected to that really give him his edge, but whatever. When the guards show up to make trouble, Zell steps up to take the punches so no one else has to, and when it's finally time to strike back, he demonstrates just how far beyond his tormentors he actually is. Like a shonen manga character, he's full of energy and wears his heart on his sleeve. He never backs down from a fight, and is more than willing to push just a little harder to break his own limits, and do his best for his friends and his family. Oh, and did I mention sprinting around the planet just to punch you in the face? On account of the huge mess Seifer made of the Timber mission, the trains get locked down and Squall, Zell, Selphie, Quistis and Rinoa find themselves unable to escape back to Balam Garden to regroup. So the team head to Galbadia Garden, where they get new orders directly from Garden Headmaster Sid himself. Sid, along with some high-ranking members of the Galbadian military, seem very well aware that the sorceress has not been appointed as any kind of peace ambassador, but rather a figure of intimidation and fear to strong-arm other nations into submissive positions. An action that will most likely start another sorceress war, with Galbadia being the enemy this time. They also have intelligence connected to the sorceress's designs for Galbadia Garden, and have decided to take the initiative in the fight and assassinate the sorceress during her inauguration parade. To carry out this mission, the team will be making use of Galbadia Garden's top sharpshooter and smooth talker, Irvine Caneus. Irvine is someone you could generously describe as being a free spirit. A man of two simple passions, that being women and guns. At least that's how he likes to present himself. One place where Irvine is similar to Squall is they both have their defenses up high, but in different ways for slightly different reasons. He graciously inaugurates himself into the party by, well, being a creep. Rather than behaving like a professional, he proceeds to hit on Selphie, then Rinoa, and when he's actually called out by Quistis for this, he acts incredibly dramatic, whining about the pressure the lone wolf sharpshooter is under. He talks about how he's such a loner and no one understands him. You know, because no one else here has to fight and kill things. They just have the inconvenience of actually looking their enemy in the eye and being in a very real position of danger themselves while they do it. Don't judge Irvine too harshly though. He's just putting on a big show for reasons we're going to get into very soon. Similar to the train abduction mission, this one is also excessively elaborate. Rather than simply take advantage of the sorceress's perceived vulnerability during the parade to fire on her unaware, they instead opt to cage her beneath an arch first so that a second team can move in to finish the job if the shot misses. Personally, I wouldn't want to spring an elaborate trap first and completely give up the element of surprise on a powerful and dangerous target like a sorceress, but maybe that's why I'm here writing, you know what, I've already done this bit. This operation goes about as wrong as you can imagine for all kinds of reasons, but none quite so devastating as Irvine cracking under the pressure of having to fire a shot that could change the world. Or so he says. He completely falls apart at the moment of truth and even complains that he always chokes like this. Why the hell was he assigned to this mission then? With a little goading from Squall though, he's convinced to fire the shot as a signal to the others to spring into action. And these kids can all cast Protect on themselves and they somehow didn't see that coming? So yeah, not exactly the big tough loner he makes himself out to be. Certainly a man with a few chinks in his armour. He does have quite the moment of redemption in a later scene when he comes to break the team out of prison, and as he becomes more and more infatuated with Selphie, he actually comes off as quite sweet in his own way. We still catch him making eyes at other girls, but he seems to go out of his way to find ways to make Selphie smile. Makes you wonder what our little ball of energy has over him, doesn't it? His real reasons for his behaviour come to light though, when he delivers one of this game's big plot twists. From here we're going to dive into the big mid-game spoiler, and see how it affects each of the characters we've mentioned so far. So consider this a mid-tier spoiler warning. You can skip to the visuals and gameplay sections if you haven't played this game already and you're still on the fence about it, but this will be our first peek behind the curtain at something strange going on, and a look at what really drives our characters forward. In terms of spoilers for the main party, there's only one big one. And to this day, I still don't know how I feel about it. Not the idea itself exactly, but its execution. The big reveal takes place in the basketball court of Trebia Garden. We gather here after giving Selphie time to check in with all the survivors of the missile attack. Rinoa at this point begins having doubts about her resolve. While the Timber Owls did get into some skirmishes with the Galbadian military occupying the area, she doesn't have the kind of training the Seeds do, and can't go to the mental edges they can go to when the fight ramps up. Viewing all this devastation firsthand has her feeling scared and unsure if she can find it in herself to stand up to such a terrifying force as the sorceress and the entire Galbadian military. It's here that our charismatic sharpshooter decides to take center stage and tell Rinoa and the others what it is he holds inside him so dearly that he's willing to fight for a chance to make the world better. And so he begins to regale the others with tales of his youth, growing up in an orphanage on the southern coast of the Central Continent. The last Sorceress War had left a lot of children without families to raise them, but at the orphanage, Irvine found a new family, and one little girl in particular who meant more to him than anyone else in the whole world. And as he weaves his tale, Selphie, Quistis, and Zell all suddenly realize they know exactly the place he's talking about. All these guys grew up in the same place, and yes, there was an annoying kid who made a point of getting under everyone's skin, especially Zell's, and a moody kid who kept to himself and liked to stand out in the rain so no one could see him crying. Irvine knew who his teammates were the moment he saw them, but far from getting some kind of tearful reunion with long-lost brothers and sisters, none of them seemed to remember anything about the part of their lives that they shared. Suddenly that big hardman act and all the bluster hits a little differently, especially with this girl right here. He was confused, hurt. Was he mistaken? What's going on here? The memories are unleashed like water through a breached dam. Visions of fireworks on the beach, and Seifer teasing Zell for being a crybaby and a chicken wuss, a name he kept using even into his adulthood. Quistis remembers that she was the big sister of the group and overprotective of her friends. She was especially concerned about Squall, who seemed more damaged than any of them, and those feelings remained even as she forgot where they came from. It wasn't romantic love as she'd initially thought. Squall and Seifer, who were especially troubled, got into lots of fights. Seifer was always desperate to be the center of attention, and when Squall wouldn't give that to him, things escalated. That rivalry has remained buried inside the two, even as the memories of what caused it vanished from their minds. The pair must have been given to the garden when they were very young, while Zell got adopted and found a family to love him and a grandfather to look up to. In a way, it's complete chance that he's reunited with these guys at all. Quistis remembers getting adopted too, but things not really working out and her transferring to garden after that. Maybe that failure to connect, to make a regular life work, is what spurred her to work so hard and make something of herself. So let's be real. This is one hell of a hook, right? We've got a sorceress with world-bending powers, and somehow, not only are all these kids reunited, seemingly by chance, but they somehow forgot a significant part of their childhood together. This could go to some really interesting places, right? Well, remember this popping up in Selphie's journal? Yeah, it turns out that one of the controversial things about Guardian forces, and the biggest reason every other military on the planet hasn't jumped on them as a potential source of immense power, is that prolonged use of them comes with memory loss. While there are a couple of sneaky little hints about this if you look around, it really does come out of nowhere, and worse still, it never comes up again. Now, I'm fine with games keeping plot elements and even mechanics somewhat obtuse for players to figure out for themselves, but I think in this case, it probably wasn't the best move. I know we RPG gamers are the type to speak and play cards with every NPC, but there are a lot of people who wouldn't have, and who had this just pop out of thin air for them. This has a lot of potential for some really reality-bending stuff too. Guardian Forces and Junction are the only really viable way for non-sorceresses to wield powerful magic. We could see the squad fighting to hold on to their memories, and even losing the parts of their personalities connected to those memories in order to stay in the fight. But once the reveal is made, they just agree to keep journals, and never really worry about it again. This feels like an attempt to recreate the Cloud Zack reveal from Final Fantasy VII, but seems to misunderstand what it was doing there in the first place. You know how with the exception of Silent Hills 1 and 3, basically every Silent Hill protagonist has to be an unreliable narrator, hiding from some terrible crime they committed, because the second game hit people really hard with that? Same thing. Those games seem to completely miss the point of what was going on in that second game, even up to having James Sunderland's personal demon show up. This moment, while it does have some beauty to it, feels like all the writers sat down and said, "Okay guys, what's the big plot twist this time?" without really considering what the twist would add to the story. Now, that doesn't mean it's all bad. It's a moment of bonding for the team. It brings them closer together than just being soldiers fighting a battle on the same side. They are literally family, fighting to hold on to their past, and it also brings to light something else very important. The real reason Irvine couldn't pull the trigger on Sorceress Adia. Because the orphanage was run by a woman called Matron. A woman who was the mother to all the lost little children of the Sorceress War. A woman who looks very, very familiar. This little trip down memory lane creates strong motivation for everyone to see through the struggle they've been thrust into until the very end, to fight for the precious little things they must hold on to, and even look upon fighting the sorceress as saving her from something, even if it is just herself. But a squad isn't a squad without a leader, which means it's time to take a deeper look at our leading men and leading ladies. Concerning Squall and Laguna, scenario writer Kazushige Nojima had this to say. The basic idea was that we wanted Laguna's character to do things that Squall was unable to. In the beginning, when I talked with Nomura, we decided Squall's character was aloof and unsociable, and he doesn't like to talk to people. I thought, okay, cool, but that might be a problem for the story. So Laguna was a way to have a leading man who could be endearing and charming in a more conventional way, while we watch Squall battle his trauma, and have the walls he's built up so high around himself slowly get worn down, so we can meet the beautiful and vulnerable young man hidden beneath. At which point, he's ready to destroy god-tier enemies in battle. When we meet Squall, he has about all the empathy and charm of a AAA live service game that's shut down after a week, and seems to take special umbrage with Quistis for trying to breach the walls, even going so far as to give her a complete cold shoulder in a moment when she's incredibly vulnerable and doubting herself. My bro. Not understanding what someone else is going through doesn't mean you have to be an ass about it. You don't see a guy laying on the floor in pain and just casually kick him in the balls because he asked you for help. This is further seen with the cold shoulder he gives to Zell on the way to their first mission, when he asks Squall to show him his gunblade. You know, to compare sizes with no subtext. These kids are about to enter a life or death situation together, and while it's clear Zell is a bit jittery, it wouldn't hurt to start building a little trust between yourself and someone who might have to have your back against a giant spider robot. In fact, just about the only person who seems to be able to get any kind of reaction out of Squall, other than contempt of course, is Seifer. Squall refuses to back down to the older boy's chiding, and is quite willing to step to him in a fight. What's interesting about these two is that Seifer clearly respects Squall. Some of his actions later may not reflect that, but for reasons we'll get into, he can't exactly be held entirely accountable for those. While waiting it out in the war zone of Dolette, Seifer almost seems willing to open up to Squall. It's hard to tell at the time if it's all just bluster or leading to some kind of new insults or conflict, but he says he's willing to tell Squall all about his romantic dream. And when Seifer suggests breaking their orders to go hunting the Galbadian soldiers, well, Squall's refusal to protest speaks volumes about this too. There is definitely some kind of kinship there, and I think it goes a long way towards Seifer leading the applause for all the students who pass the exam, even when he fails. But this is where the Squall is just an edgy teen comes from. Yeah, he starts there, but if you think that's where it finishes, you either didn't finish the game, or you completely missed most of the point of like half of Disc 2 and all of Disc 3. Pain and loss are all things handled in a deeply personal way. All of our cast have lost their parents. It's possible that they were too young to really remember when it happened, but they were certainly at a very vulnerable stage in their life. Squall got something of a double gut punch though. He not only lost his parents, but one day, the girl he thought of as his big sister, an older girl named Elone, just vanished. This event cut him deeply, and was something he never received any kind of explanation or closure about. He thought it was his fault, that perhaps he'd done something wrong. It made him keep people at arm's length. He didn't want to endure the pain of being abandoned again, and so simply cut everyone else off. He built up walls around himself and threw himself into his training. He wanted to become as strong as he possibly could, just so he could always stand on his own legs and not need to depend on anyone else. And when a certain other boy tried to taunt him, he made it very clear he wasn't going to put up with any of his crap. Over and over again. Squall became habituated to keeping people away and built his identity around it. Now, as something of a hermit myself who's wrestled with a lot of bad experiences and personal demons to arrive at this place, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that everyone who enjoys their own company is secretly yearning for someone to come and force their way into their lives. It's entirely possible to find something like true peace by yourself. But it becomes very clear soon enough that our boy here isn't at peace, and he isn't healthy, and one day, this will kill him. Squall's first moment of vulnerability comes in Galbadia Garden, while waiting to be debriefed. After Seifer's bungled attempt to take a whole-ass dictator hostage, and being easily subdued by the sorceress, the garden receives an announcement of the young man's execution. While this report doesn't exactly turn out to be entirely accurate, it's something of a blow to the whole team. Yes, he was a jerk, and a bully, and it was his own stupid fault that he got into that situation to begin with. But no one in that room actually wanted the poor guy dead. least of all Rinoa, who apparently had something of a fling with him when she was 16. Squall's internal monologue can often be read during some of the more emotionally intense moments in the game. This was a creative choice to try and help players connect with him early on when he's still emotionally cut off. In an earlier scene when Rinoa is berating him for his callous attitude towards his team, who've just suffered a big defeat, we see through his internal monologue that he's just being pragmatic. In fact, from his point of view, he can't understand why anyone wouldn't adopt his attitude, which goes to show he's got a lot to learn about being a leader and both dealing with and inspiring other people. In this scene, where they hear about Seifer's execution, we see that despite being a well-trained soldier who's killed both monsters and people in the line of duty, he's still a 17-year-old kid, and reconciling his own mortality is not something he's really done yet. Hell, I know people much older than me who still haven't done it. He can't stand hearing Seifer being talked about in the past tense, and freaks out about the idea of it happening to him. This outburst can seem a little insensitive though. After all, this moment is about Seifer, so why is Squall trying to make it about himself? Well, it's because he really doesn't process feelings very well. He's made a point of not making connections with people, so even the emotions of losing someone like Seifer are very overwhelming for him. That's my read on the situation anyway. For all this though, Squall goes on to develop incredible leadership skills. He's able to get his teams organised, and even gets through to Irvine when he's at his lowest point, and actually consoles him when the shot he fires fails to hit the target. He demonstrates absolute ferocity too, leaping into the thick of the fight to first rescue Rinoa from a very bad situation, and then find himself in a one-on-one confrontation with Seifer, who is miraculously restored to life, and now serving as the sorceress's knight. This conflict ends with the team's first battle with the sorceress herself, one that shows they are woefully unprepared for this fight. I'll be honest, I couldn't really find an organic place to insert this little sidebar concerning Seifer, Fujin and Rajin, but since we've established he's not dead at this point, I may as well bring it up here. The young man in the long coat with an equally absurd sword to our hero brings up a certain image, doesn't it? As I said in my video on 7, it's the law of fantasy that any trouble besetting the world can be fixed if the hero defeats the villain in a sword fight. But Seifer doesn't really hold that level of status in the game. He's both a more nuanced character and a much lower level threat than Sephiroth. And while it's easy to see at his reappearance during the sorceress's parade that he isn't exactly in control of himself, or that maybe something in his worldview has been jolted, he actually considers himself the hero of the story. Since Seifer never actually tells Squall his romantic dream, it's hard to know whether the sorceress pulled on an existing desire of his, or just implanted it in his head. Although, the Final Fantasy VIII Ultimerica book says that he fell in love with the idea from watching a movie, and his victory pose is actually mimicking the knight in that movie. Huh. A movie about a sorceress knight with a gunblade. Anyway, at this point, he has become her knight, and he proclaims that this is what he was training for all along. In a later scene, where he's overseeing Squall being electrocuted, he tells an incredibly twisted version of events, where he is the brave and valiant knight, defending the solitary sorceress from the terrible Seed army. I suspect the fact he holds some grudge against the Garden for not letting him graduate makes this version of events much easier for him to swallow. I'm going to give Seifer the benefit of the doubt here too, and say that he isn't really thinking straight in this scene. Yes, he's a jerk, but I don't think he'd actually want to torture Squall were he in a correct frame of mind. What makes Seifer a little more interesting though are Fujin and Rajin. These two were originally designed for Final Fantasy VII, but were eventually cut from the game because they were a little too close to the Turks. They occupy that same B-tier villain rung in this game too. They are guys who've done questionable things for their jobs for sure, but they're not wholeheartedly evil. The truth is, they're a posse. They are three kids who found each other and formed a connection. In Balamb Garden, they were the disciplinary committee, and seemed to have limited authority to keep students in line. Authority they were fond of abusing. Makes you wonder if Seifer was deliberately failing those exams. While they're all jerks, they just strike me as troubled teens. Seifer especially so. He's crafted as something of an opposite to Squall. Everything from his hair colour to his personality seems to be an inversion of him. This is also highlighted by the fact Seifer has two friends who stick to him like glue, and Squall likes to sit in his room by himself. There are several scenes where it's clear Fujin and Rajin aren't entirely cool with the things they're being asked to do, but they do it to stick by their best friend and leader. And damn if that isn't just a little noble. They think if they don't stick by him, who will? Seifer's got underlings in the Galbadian army, but these two are his only friends. It's from this friendship too that late game, they even step aside to let Squall and his friends get at him. It's very clear to them by then that Seifer isn't acting like himself. Rajin says they aren't abandoning him, that they'll help him achieve his dreams, but what he's doing late game clearly isn't his dream. And since they can't get to him as friends, the only option to save him is to step back and let Squall and his team put him down. And that's some real tough love right there. It's a shame we only get a few scenes with these guys and only get to scratch the surface of their relationships, because they're interesting, nuanced antagonists, and in their own ways, good people. Jerks for sure, but jerks aren't beyond learning from their mistakes and making better choices moving forward. We've already met Laguna, Kiros and Ward in the setup, and seen how the Big Klutz differs from Squall in quite a few ways. Where Squall is cut off and distant, Laguna couldn't be tighter with his two comrades, and they in turn have developed something like a deep trust in him to get them out of whatever situation they've got themselves into this time. While Squall's most intense relationship is with an annoying older boy who wants to fight him, Laguna loves to drink with his friends and is very open about his feelings towards a certain piano player. We've seen the start of a budding romance there. Once the big lug got out of his own way and basically started yapping her ear off like an excited little kid, he charmed... Well, he didn't quite get the pants off of her, but this isn't that kind of game. But it's his passion that inspires her, to not be held back by fear. Julia goes on to write the song that would become this game's theme, and if you spent any time listening to the lyrics, you'll know that despite what Laguna promised her, the soldier never came home. We have one more very plot-relevant flashback with him and the boys battling the forces of sorceress Adele at the lunatic Pandora excavation site. The cool thing about this part of the game is you can set things in motion that will pay off much later when Squall and his gang get there in the future. The problem is, this place is a labyrinth, and when you get to a certain point it just launches you into a pre-scripted event that moves the story forward, meaning you can't just head back and check down the paths you missed. The boys' final battle doesn't go so well. In fact, Ward takes a shot to the throat which leaves him unable to speak ever again. Hang on, if he's wounded in turn-based combat he can just pop a cure, surely? Trying to square the logic of the world and the battles aside, our next encounter with Laguna is in a very different place, with a man who may have just found everything he's ever wanted. You see, Laguna wasn't a casualty of the Sorceress War exactly. While Kiros and Ward were able to report back home eventually, Laguna's leap of faith saw him getting swept away and eventually washing up on a beach at death's door and being found and nursed back to health in a town called Windhill by a woman named Rain. Final Fantasy VIII has so many cozy vibes. The atmosphere here, especially in this old European style town, is one of total safety. It actually reminds me a lot of Vargan in Siberia the world before. While it's safe to say Laguna was deeply infatuated with Julia, Windhill was the place where he met the first woman he ever fell truly in love with. Well, yes, Rain also eventually, but I'm talking about the little girl who started calling him uncle. This is the first moment we meet Elone. Well, second, but you know, time travel. Elone lost her parents to the war and has been adopted by Rain. And now Laguna is on his feet and keeping monsters out of the town to pay for his food and board. Elone looks up to him as a father or maybe big brother figure and something like a personal knight in shining armor. Laguna is such a great dad though, the way he plays with Elone and refers to her as commander. When Laguna finally catches up with Kiros during the flashback, Kiros can't help but notice how much he's changed. This is a man at peace, a man who's found what he wants from life. He isn't even all that fazed to discover that Julia got married to an important Galbadian general, and even his old dream of being a journalist and travelling the world seems less important than just staying here with these two girls who've given his life more meaning than anything else ever has. It's also touching to hear Rain and Elone talking about him in a later scene. As far as I can tell, Laguna is the last person Rain would ever consider becoming romantically involved with, and yet, well, she wants to marry the guy and turn the three of them into a real family. This whole scene is a nice break from the heart-pounding sequences that brought us up to this moment, but it ends rather abruptly in more ways than one. What we know from unraveling the game's plot is that S-Star soldiers eventually came to Windhill seeking a potential successor to take Sorceress Adele's power and kidnapped Elone. This led to Laguna getting his band back together and rushing off on a whirlwind, globe-spanning adventure to save her and, unfortunately, never coming home. It wouldn't be right to finish this initial character section without taking a look at the other half of the romantic leads. Rinoa Hartley isn't a seed with a lifetime of training and giant monsters to back her up. She is in fact the daughter of a powerful Galbadian general and a famous singer. Yeah, these stories are entwined in more ways than one, who has become politically active as she's grown up. General Caraway isn't actually that bad of a guy. Well, what we see of him anyway. He clearly understands that the sorceress is a threat and is involved with the assassination attempt on her. However, he isn't all that interested in changing the course of Galbadia's politics and releasing territories that they've taken by force in the past. This is likely one of several reasons why he and Rinoa grew more and more estranged, and why she ultimately became involved with a resistance group in Timber. However, when we meet her on the Owl's mobile base, we see she certainly hasn't given up her life of luxury, and even has the nickname of the Princess among her peers. I'm not sure if they call her that to her face though. Despite her background and upbringing though, Rinoa is both liked and respected by her peers. She shows empathy for them, congratulates them when they do well, and inspires them when things don't go well. I can't help but think that her example, along with her outburst at Squall on their way to Galbadia Garden, didn't have some kind of effect on him. She even gets through to Seifer. We discover from Rinoa that he was the one who suggested the idea of hiring seeds to help her cause. In fact, he's the one she was looking for at the dance, as Seifer was going to introduce her to Sid so she could plead her case directly, rather than go through the usual channels that are mainly controlled by the Garden Master. And as stupid and reckless as Seifer's actions are during the Timber mission, they come from a good place. He was shocked that only 3 newly grads, one of whom was Zell, who he particularly dislikes, were dispatched to help with such a dangerous operation, and decided to take matters into his own hands. Rinoa isn't exactly above making stupid decisions of her own though, but just like Seifer, she does so with the best of intentions. During the assassination attempt, Rinoa gets left out of the proceedings, even being locked in her room by her father, who wants to keep her out of harm's way. There's clearly a lot of baggage here. She manages to escape this trap and also acquire a Dr. Odine bangle that is supposed to suppress the powers of a sorceress. Quistis though, well, she's kind of a bitch at this moment. Again, I think she has good intentions too. This is a dangerous situation that could go very badly for everyone involved, and tensions are no doubt very high, but damn woman, put the claws away. She actually feels really bad about this later on, and even jeopardizes the mission to run back and apologize, only to find the girl is gone. Yup, she runs off to put herself directly in harm's way. Maybe her father wasn't so misguided after all, and she very quickly succumbs to the sorceress's power. In the aftermath of the failed hit, the seeds, minus Irvine, are rounded up and placed in prison. This is easily the single worst part of the game, as the devs basically imagined a way to use a single background for about an hour of gameplay under the guise of, all the floors in this place look the same. And they make you run up and down the whole prison at least 3 times. There are even missable items here that require extra laps to collect, and there was no way in hell I was extending my visit into this dump for those reasons. Rinoa actually gets pardoned and removed from here by her father swinging his clout around, and Irvine is sent to collect her. Now, I'm not entirely convinced that Irvine really had any intention of leaving everyone back there. Maybe he was going to clear one problem first, before going back after another. But Rinoa basically bullies him into returning to the prison and helping with the jailbreak. This way, she gets to return the favour to Squall and rescue him back. While she's a bit naive, she's a sweet and caring girl who has a way of slipping beneath your defences and getting at the soft core within. Even though she isn't one of the seeds, they soon come to accept her as one of their own. And that blade of hers is exactly the right shape to slip beneath the few chinks in their very moody leader's armour. The missile strike that threatens Balam Garden sees Squall rushing back to warn the headmaster. Squall returns to find the place in disarray. The Garden Master Norg has decided to just give Headmaster Sid to the sorceress to appease her, and there's something of a civil war going on between the Garden Master faction and the Sid faction. Amidst all this, Squall is able to locate Sid and report on the situation. Sid explains that Balam Garden is built atop an old military bunker that actually had defences against missile attacks built into it, and that these may now be their only hope. What are these defences, you ask? Well, the whole thing can just get up and fly away. Yeah, I was gobsmacked too. This basically leads to the second part of the game that sees Garden and Seed commencing what Sid calls their true purpose: to battle the sorceress. And Garden being used as their mobile base, and our first all-terrain vehicle in the game. As Sid doesn't feel he is equipped to command Seeds for this battle, being more of an administrator himself, he offloads the job onto Squall. I know how this may seem. After all, he only recently graduated, and his first two missions technically failed. Surely there are more qualified people than this guy to lead Seed to battle a sorceress, who now commands probably the strongest military power on the planet. But I kinda like this moment. Firstly, I'd say Sid justifies himself quite well to Squall, in that there aren't actually any other Seeds with command experience who've actually fought the sorceress already available. And for whatever else you can say about Squall, Balam Garden and everyone in it is safe because of him. But at the moment Sid announces this transition of power, we also see Squall's inner reactions. This isn't something he wanted. He has massive doubts about himself and his abilities, and feels like he's having this responsibility unfairly dumped on his shoulders. He completely freaks out about this, not just because of the pressure, but because it means depending on others to get the job done too. Something he really isn't good at. This climax is one of the game's more touching moments though. I mentioned that Selphie is part of the Garden Festival Committee, and prior to dealing with conflicts on a potentially global scale, was charging around the garden trying to organise a big concert for the students. So Irvine, in a bid to endear himself to her, and also cheer her up after what happened to Trebia, suggests that they put on a concert to both congratulate Squall, and also let the big dumb lug know that he hasn't actually got to shoulder this burden alone. That there's a very particular group of people who've seen the best in him, even as he does his best to hide it, who can tell that he's a natural leader and a courageous fighter. A group that might just want to consider themselves something like friends or comrades. All he needs to do is meet them. Not even halfway. But who's the person who could really get this across to him? Not Quistis for sure. We all saw how her last attempt to connect with him went. No. We need someone from the outside. Someone who's already snuck beneath his armour once before. Someone who makes him act just a little differently. Not that he'd notice, but just enough that everyone else does. It's true that with all the action and danger of the game's first acts, it can be hard to see where Squall begins to foster affection for Rinoa. Hell, he probably doesn't have a clue either. But it's there. It's subtle. Not quite as subtle as her asking Zell to get a copy of his ring so she can have one. But there is something there. Something small. A seed, you might say. One that is going to grow into something more important to Squall than anything else in the world. Final Fantasy VII had seen the beginning of a debate concerning the art style 3D Final Fantasy would have. The men on the battlefield were Hironobu Sakaguchi, who wanted to keep the super deformed cutesy look that the sprites in the first 6 games had, and Yoshinori Kitase, who envisioned a more mature looking Final Fantasy with realistically proportioned characters. For 7, a kind of compromise had been reached, which saw us having blocky low poly world characters and more realistic battle models. This also served as a kind of cushion for longtime fans who might not have reacted so well to such a big change all at once. However, since 8 was made without any input from Sakaguchi, Kitase-san and Nomura-san were free to take the art direction exactly where they wanted it. And while, in his own words, Sakaguchi-san pulled the rudder hard in the other direction for 9, 8 was the omen of things to come for the series going forward. To quote Kitase again,
"Making the character models full-sized was another idea we had from the start. The characters in Final Fantasy VII still looked a little doll-like. Right now we're creating a CG movie in Hawaii, and that will feature characters that look nearly human. Final Fantasy VIII is like halfway between that and the earlier cartoonish style. When I saw the finished movies, I realized it was the right choice."
The movie in question is of course the ill-fated Final Fantasy The Spirits Within. Since a lot of the CG artists they brought in to work on Final Fantasy VII had a background in movies that went beyond short cinematic cutscenes, this seemed like a good project to expand the company's portfolio, with the main character, Aki Ross, being touted as a kind of virtual actress who would appear in multiple features as different characters. While the movie flopped and put Square in a lot of financial difficulty, we would eventually get the Final Fantasy movie we all wanted.
But that is a tale for another time.
There was, however, one big problem with this approach, and it actually stemmed from a combination of working with my beloved pre-rendered backgrounds, the objectively best kind of background, and the limited resolution of textures and overall output of the PlayStation 1. Yusuke Naura, the game's chief graphical designer, puts it like this. "The first challenge I had with FF8 was dealing with the new full-sized character models. They're very different from the chibi-sized models we used in FF7. The FF7 models have some advantages. You could see their faces even when the camera is zoomed out, and their smaller size allows the background to feel relatively larger by comparison. The big-head, small-bodied chibi sprites of the NES and SNES days had been a way of working within the limitations of those consoles, while still keeping the characters expressive and easy to identify on screen. And for everything the PS1 could do, I think we can all agree that expressive, easy-to-read faces on character models wasn't exactly its strong point. In order to combat this problem, a lot of extra effort was put into the camera work, and a lot more close-up shots were used that allowed the players to see the faces of the characters. But since these are all pre-rendered backgrounds, you can't just have the camera zoom in like in a full 3D world. Nope. Those backgrounds have to be rendered out on those powerful workstations of theirs and brought into the game engine after, then compressed down to fit onto a CD. It also meant they'd need a lot more disk space to account for the 400 or so extra backgrounds they rendered out to allow for all those extra close-up shots in a scene. I guess this falls into those new challenges that the developers set themselves to keep the game development fresh and their motivation strong. But if you will permit me a moment of baseless speculation, I would like to gossip. Going back to the extensive interviews with the Final Fantasy developers in Edge magazine January 2018, there's a section from Kitase that reads like this.
"When Sakaguchi first saw the demo at the school and a realistically proportioned human character, he said to me, that looks okay, but might you consider doing it with more, deformed characters? He believed that is what the series should look like."
It follows on with Sakaguchi talking about pulling the rudder hard back in the other direction with Final Fantasy IX, which of course looks like this. Well, remember my earlier analogy about borrowing the boss's Mercedes? Sakaguchi had given them free rein to do whatever they wanted with Final Fantasy VIII, and wasn't about to go back on that just because he didn't like what he saw. "Oh, come on, Arkham. He didn't say he didn't like it, just that chibi characters might be better." Well, yeah, true, but Japanese people don't say what they mean. Especially not in the workplace. There's a couple of expressions used over here. One is called hone, and the other, tatemai. Hone is your real feeling, the thing that should never be expressed in public unless you are absolutely drunk out of your tree. And tatemai is a polite mask you put on when dealing with people. Take a look at Alex's video on Japanese drinking culture if you're interested in this. Read the air is an expression that comes from Japanese, as their entire culture is about picking up on subtle social cues that are kept beneath the surface. So, just saying something like, "Maybe the way we've always done it would be better," could very well be interpreted as,
Look how they massacred my boy.
And certainly, actions speak louder than words here. Again, it's just gossip. We're dealing with a translation of an interview where two guys are talking about a conversation they had over 20 years ago. It's safe to say we can't extrapolate a great deal of cultural nuance out of these words. I don't know for sure what was going on in Sakaguchi's head at the time, and we all know the road the graphical arms race would lead the series down, for better or worse. So back to some more positive art stuff. The focus of this game was bright and bold, and while they were edging closer to realism with their look, they wanted something picturesque and fantastical, sort of like they were taking beautiful paintings and trying to show them in a more realistic way. The garden is a good example here. The big halo that it has served absolutely no purpose in the original design, and has no functional way of being supported there, but adding it was what brought the whole thing together and made them move forward with it. The environmental design team actually visited a lot of colleges and universities, especially those with more modern designs, and took a lot of photos for inspiration. The character designs were all done by Tetsuya Nomura, and quite a few of the characters went through some iterations before they got the green light from Kitase. Squall had to have a less vacant expression, and several characters, including Irvine apparently, needed roughing up to prevent them from looking like pretty boys.
They're the same picture.
He also worked on the designs and storyboarded the summon animations for several Guardian forces. These guys are the absolute pinnacle for summon animations for this generation in my opinion. Both their designs and their animations are really awe-inspiring, and it's almost a shame that you have to focus on that little button prompt in the lower right corner to boost them versus just enjoying the show. We wouldn't see summon animations or summon monsters looking this good again until 10. Don't get me wrong, I love 9 summons. It is my favourite FF game after all, but these really are something else. I got a real kick the first time I saw each one. They aren't all super badass either. We've got a few comedy ones to mix up the tone a little here and there, and the ultimate Final Fantasy power fantasy of having one of the most terrifying non-boss enemies on your side for a change. Love these stabby little guys. I might have said that before. The 3D models in this game all use texture maps and show off a lot more detail than the previous game's models, and the cinematic cutscenes are on a whole other level this time. Having unpacked all the textures from the remaster, I have to say, I really appreciate all the extra work that's gone into these new textures. I love hand-painted textures with baked-in shadows, and it's one of my preferred texturing methods in my own workflow, if for no other reason than I don't have to give Adobe money just to use Substance Painter. I hate Adobe. It's just a shame about the backgrounds. As mentioned in the development section, I appreciate that the remaster team did the best they could under difficult circumstances, but the proof of the pudding is in the eating, and there are quite a few scenes where the illusion of the characters being in the world doesn't quite work. Who knows, maybe we'll get an honest-to-goodness remake one day, but I think it's unlikely. This time, motion and facial capture was used for the cutscenes, and Kitase had the pleasure of directing actual actors for the scenes, and seeing how they bring their own interpretation of the characters to the table. There are several large-scale battles that take place in the game, and they look absolutely spectacular. Well, kinda. You see, there is something of a stark contrast between the world in the cutscenes and in the game world. Take a look at this moment here of lots of Galbadian soldiers escaping a missile base that's about to self-destruct. Notice how there's never more than 3 character models on the screen at a time. You think maybe they're working within certain limitations here? Then there's the battle between Balam and Galbadia Gardens. The cutscenes would have you feel it's going down like this. But the in-game graphics turn it into this. Yeah, those seeds are all pre-rendered. Also, where are all the Guardian Forces? Isn't that what gives Seeds their edge? Why is Squall the only one using them? Without a doubt though, the two most important scenes in the game, and the ones that got the most attention and money spent on them, are the Balam Garden graduation dance scene and the sorceress's welcome parade. The former being important as it's Squall's first encounter with Rinoa, and it was used heavily in the promotion material for the game. The latter is the moment our enemy makes herself known to us. She is seen without her mask and brought into the center stage by a massive parade, with floats and dancers and crowds cheering her on like she's their favorite idol. It's trying to do the same thing that Sephiroth walking through the fire did in 7, just in a different way. Not long after this, we are thrust into our first big battle with both her and her newly crowned knight. Everything about the story and conflict and overall threat level of the game gets turned up to 11 from here. This moment marks the point where we are no longer high school kids worrying about what happens in front of our lockers, or overqualified special forces helping some kids play freedom fighter. A global level threat has arrived, and we are not equipped to handle it. Not by a long shot. Which means we've got to junction the hell up. Final Fantasy VIII is a jobless system where any character can assume any role in the party that you want them to. I may be off base here, but it seems like this is one reason for having only 3 party members instead of 4. In class-based systems, you're nearly always going to have one slot taken up by a healer, so you want at least 3 more slots to offer a good variety of skills and strategy. However, if every character can do a little of everything, then you can get away with just 3 members, and maybe bypass some of the hardware's technical limitations along the way. All our characters are Seeds, and aside from their weapon specializations, all Seeds undergo the same training and use the same powers in battle. In the Blade Runner inspired dystopian city of Midgar, magic is for sale in shops, or can sometimes just be found on the floor if you're lucky. But it's something of a rarity in this world. So it's a Seed's ability to use magic, and the place from which they derive that power, that makes them truly special and dangerous. The source of their powers are Guardian Forces. The actual lore of Guardian Forces is somewhat vague. I'm going to take a guess that, like most monsters, they come from the planet's moon, but are possessed of higher degrees of intelligence and thrive in symbiosis with humans rather than trying to eat them. By junctioning, or merging with these powerful monsters, Seeds can literally suck magic out of their enemies, and special places around the world that are abundant with it called draw points. Cast it on their enemies in battle, hook the power of those spells up to things like their physical stats, attacks and defense to massively boost their prowess in combat, and summon these demigods to fight at their side. This seems to have become one of the most polarizing systems in all of Final Fantasy, as it both removes the magic point system used in every game up until this point, and is, well, it's kind of broken, and depending on how you feel about exploiting game systems, you may or may not be into that. At the top of the list of Junction requirements are the Guardian Forces, or GFs for short. These are your Pokemons, but like a million times cooler. I don't like Pokemon and never have. I don't think it's especially bad, but similar to Harry Potter, it just comes across as derivative and mediocre to me, and I can't understand why this particular derivative mediocre product is the one that got all the attention compared to all the other products like it. Plus, Nintendo are just being assholes about it at this point, and I'm kinda done with them too. There are various ways to acquire GFs. Your first 2 are just waiting for you on your class computer somehow. Some of them can be extracted from powerful boss enemies, and Doom Train can be acquired by collecting 3 stacks of 6 obtuse items that you'd be hard pushed to figure out you needed without a guide. A large number of them will have to be fought out in the wild so that the Seeds can earn their respect and gain access to their powers. These battles aren't all that hard if you know they're coming, as it's usually pretty easy to intuit what any given GF's elemental strengths and weaknesses are, and set up a party to exploit those. In the case of Diablos, who used mainly gravity magic, you're better off just not healing and using limit break spam to bring him quickly into the fold. Limit breaks aren't on a charge in this game, rather, they become available once your HP is critically low or someone casts Aura on a party member. And then they remain available until the character is healed or the spell wears off. Since gravity magic damages characters based on a percentage of their current health, and Diablos rarely uses his physical attack, you're actually quite safe even at low HP, and can get an easy win on this guy that way. Blows my mind how much trouble I had with him the first time I tried to recruit him. But hey, this was only my second RPG at the time. Once you've won over the affection or respect of your new beastie bestie, you get to name them and have a gander at their ability list. All GFs have a series of pre-installed abilities that you can immediately make use of, and a list of potential abilities that can be learnt by them, as well as some blank space for new abilities to be added to the list from various sources. For example, when you learn one ability, such as Strength plus 20%, the next level up in that chain, Strength 40%, will be added to that list. This means you have to be picky about the order in which you learn abilities, as there are more potential abilities to learn than can fit in any one GF's list. You can also add abilities by having them consume rare items, either found in the wild or bought from a pet store. Learnt abilities are equipped on the abilities menu. You can choose 3 actives and 2 passives usually. A few Guardian Forces have an ability called Setup 3 that lets you have 3 passive abilities, and there's a much rarer Setup 4 ability that Bahamut has, and others can learn by using one of the hardest to find items in the game. Within your active ability block, you will always have Attack, and you'll start with options for GF, that lets you summon your monster into battle, Draw, which we'll get to in a moment, Magic and Items, and you won't be able to have all of them on any one character. Your GFs can learn a variety of extra attacks like Mad Rush that berserks the entire party, Doom that starts a death timer on an enemy, or Dark Side that sacrifices your own HP for greater damage. Most of these, however, aren't really worth trading one of your basic skills for. Your passives are, as usual for any RPG, where it's really at though. These will offer massive boosts to your HP, any of your stats, let you mug when you attack, prevent you from being ambushed, make sure you always go first, and so on. You level up your GFs by junctioning them to you. This lets them take up space in your brain somehow. Once equipped though, GFs will gain AP in each battle, that will be slotted into the chosen skill that the creature is learning. Generally, I always choose Boost first. It's cheap and turns the long summoning animation into a game of stop and go to try and boost the GF's attack power. This is definitely one way to deal with complaints about overly long summoning animations. I'm not saying it's bad. I can't say I was ever bored in any of the early battles when I used my GFs a lot, but it wouldn't be my first choice of idea for dealing with that criticism. Next, I'll go after any refinement or menu-based skills. These let you change items into other items, items into spells, and spells into even better versions of those spells. These are the skills that will really help you break the game later on, as it's the fastest and most convenient way to get access to lots of powerful magic. The other way is by drawing it from enemies. When Battle Director Hiroyuki Ito was coming up with this system, draw was one of the first things that he really locked in, as both a mechanic and as something to inform the player about the world. One problem it had though was that it was incompatible with the magic point systems used in Final Fantasy up to this point. In his own words, he said, "If magic is something you acquire by junctioning, then the whole concept of MP doesn't make much sense. Likewise, buying magic in a store doesn't make sense either. Magic isn't a thing, right?" That line of thought led me to the draw mechanic. I like the lore it suggests to players too, that the reason you draw magic from monsters is that all living creatures are comprised in some way of different elemental substances. It's about as simple as it sounds. You use the draw command, target an enemy, see what spells they have inside them, and suck them out like you're Shang Tsung winning a tournament. That's it. You can either draw and cast straight onto the enemy, effectively bludgeoning them to death with their own souls, or draw and store and gain a number of castings of a spell in your stock to use at any time. Spells can be stored in stocks of 100, and there's a hard limit on the total number of spells a character can stock, meaning you'll have to refine less powerful spells into stronger ones and offload some onto the characters you don't use as much to make space for others. While you can cast magic, a far more productive use of this is slotting it into your various stats to power up your character. Each GF will give you access to a different variety of stat junctions, and you can slot your spells into those stats from there. Different spells are more or less effective in different areas. For example, spells that cure or resurrect are going to bolster your HP much more, while powerful attack spells like Ultima and Flare are going to drive your attack power through the roof. Add a strength plus 60% passive buff into the mix, and you'll be one-shotting enemies you really shouldn't be very quickly. In fact, for a big chunk of this game, I had Squall hitting way higher than anyone else in the team, making them almost useless by comparison. No one GF will give you access to every stat junction, which is why it's important to get all of them and share them around in a smart and tactical way to suit the kind of characters you want to create. But wait, there's more. Junctions also work for statuses and elemental offense and defense. So say you're in an area fighting a lot of robots that are weak to lightning spells. Rather than casting lightning on them, you can use lightning to bolster your attacks and gain extra damage that way. Stuck in a fire cave or on a frozen mountain fighting creatures with strong elemental affinities? Okay, junction that element into your elemental defenses and render their attacks harmless. If you get that percentage high enough, you'll actually start to absorb those attacks and be healed by them instead. It's the same for status abnormalities. If you've got a big hitter who'll be useless if he's hit by blind, you could spend a character's action using magic or items to remove the blind status. Or you could just junction a bunch of blind spells into their status defense and make them resistant to the spell. Late game, I had 100 sleep spells junctioned into Squall's status attack, meaning he basically put every enemy he hit to sleep. Of course, exceptionally strong status attacks like the fabled Bad Breath can't be completely blocked, but you can take the biggest sting out of it if you really have to hunt these things. You've probably noticed two glaring things about this system. The first is that it's really versatile and somewhat convoluted. The auto junction button will take a lot of work out of this though. Just tell it what you want to focus on and it'll take care of the problems for you, rather than you having to check the benefits of each spell in each slot respectively. But yes, there are a lot of interesting ways to manipulate this system. The other thing you've probably noticed is it actively discourages casting your stock spells, as you are literally making yourself weaker every time you do. You certainly can spend a lot of the game firing off different spells and summoning your GFs to battle, but there's nothing more efficient than stockpiling most of your magic to massively buff your characters, casting Aura on Squall to get access to his limit break, Meltdown on the enemy to strip away their defenses, and letting him go to town with Renzokukan. If he does his Lionheart finisher too, even the majority of bosses can't stand up to that. There is one more big issue of Junction, and that is that it is easy to break even at the start of the game, thanks to these abilities right here. One thing Ito said in his interview about Junction was, "The thing is, with RPGs, in the second half of the game, it usually becomes trivial to defeat most enemies. With the draw system though, even late in the game, you can't just bolt through everyone. If you want a particular monster's magic, you've got to be more deliberate." Well, he failed here. Because of certain abilities, especially the card ability, it's very easy to gain access to high-level magic really early in the game and breeze through most of the enemies you come up against. Likewise, in the endgame, you almost never need to draw from an enemy thanks to refinements and draw points located on the world map. I do really like Junction. I think it's one of the most interesting systems out of all these games, but I personally think it's flawed. And despite what the developers have said about it in later interviews, I'm not entirely convinced that those flaws were by design. So now we're powered up, why don't we go pick a fight? This is the fourth classic Final Fantasy game that I've covered on this channel, so do I really need to explain random battles and ATB to you again? No? Okay, sick. Since Junction and spell stocks remove the need for MP as a limiter on spellcasting, how does that translate to those powerful summons? Since they're basically more powerful spells with longer animations, what's stopping these from being spammed and everything else being ignored? The solution here comes in the form of a timer. Once a GF has been chosen to be summoned into battle, the seed will have to concentrate for a period of time on bringing them in. While this is happening, their HP will be switched out with the GF's HP, and any damage they receive will go onto the GF. In the worst case scenario, a GF can be KO'd before the summon animation has a chance to happen, but this will only usually be a potential risk if you're doing multiple castings in a longer boss fight. GFs have levels and affinity, so as they power up, their own HP and attack power will grow, but they'll also come much faster to a seed with whom they have high affinity. You achieve this by keeping them junctioned, summoning them a lot, and also using certain types of elemental items on them. GFs also have their own subset of recovery items that can be used outside of battle if they take a lot of damage. But that's not all. There are a few special GFs that can only be summoned using rare items. Phoenix will be called the first time by using a Phoenix Pinion, and from there it comes randomly if the party is wiped. A Chocobo and a Moomba GF can also be summoned by tossing out rare items. And there's a special ability that can be taught to a GF that summons this cute Moogle to refresh all their HP. Odin will also show up whenever the hell he wants to. The big bad Dark Rider is willing to join your party if they can best him in combat within a certain time limit, after navigating a ruin full of tomberries, so you need that no encounter ability here. But he cannot be junctioned and offers no skills to learn. Instead, he randomly turns up at the start of battles to end them immediately with his instant death attack, Zantaskuten. This keeps him out of boss battles. That is, unless you find him before the end of Disc 3. Sensing a powerful enemy to duel with, Odin will show up to battle Seifer, and it won't really go all that well for the big guy. This odd little story moment will see Gilgamesh show up at the end of the fight, when we've already done all the hard work, and claim victory on account of being the guy who got the last hit in. Real courageous move there, bud. After which, he becomes the party's new randomly spawning GF. Gilgamesh will make use of one of 4 swords chosen at random, with different effects, making him overall less reliable than Odin, who just murked everything that stood against him. Certainly the animation and creature design is very cool, but you can literally do 1 HP damage with one of his attacks, which, needless to say, is just wasting people's time. A few other systems also got quite the overhaul in this game, especially money and limit breaks. It was actually feedback from the international players that saw Kitase try out a salary system this time, rather than just giving Gil at the end of battles. Apparently, the American audience couldn't understand why beating monsters netted cash, so, since Squall and his buddies are seeds as a profession, they get paid at regular intervals, and the amount they get paid depends on their seed rank. You can take a seed rank test from the menu at any time you want to increase your salary, and you'll be asked a series of simple yes or no questions about in-game mechanics and lore. Get all the questions right, and you go up a level. It's another nice idea, but one that's easy to break again even without a guide. You don't even need to read the questions, just hit yes for all of them, look at the score, now go through the test again and change the first answer to no, and all the others to yes. Did your score go up or down? Rinse and repeat until you pass. That being said, even with the favoured customer perk you can get later in the game, there isn't that much worth buying in the shops. As we'll discuss in a minute, you don't need to buy weapons or armour, it's only really potions and other recovery items you need money for. By the time you're buying big stacks of these to refine into powerful magic, you'll have more than enough money, without even having climbed very high in the seed rankings. Swinging back around to combat related stuff, let's look at some of the changes that were made to weapons and limit breaks in this one. Squall easily has the most overpowered limit break in the entire game with Renzoku-kan. Renzoku means continuous, as we see here with One Punch Man's continuous regular punches. And Ken is the kanji for sword, so it's a series of attacks that can be amplified with well-timed trigger presses. The animation and as such the timing for the trigger pulls will vary depending on the size of the enemy, and depending on a variety of factors, Squall may launch into a finisher after that. Squall gains more finishers by upgrading his gunblade. Final Fantasy VIII has much fewer weapons than 7. To quote battle director Ito again, he said, FF8 has significantly more realistic graphics than before. That realism meant that when you equip a weapon, it should show that individual weapon's graphics on the character, but creating graphics for every different weapon would have been prohibitively difficult. While 7 does have a 3D model for each weapon in the game, it doesn't use texture maps for the colours, instead using simple colour palettes that makes the process of making the weapons faster, and the overall space they take up in the game's files a lot smaller. In 7, you would roll into town and immediately dump all your hard-won gil on new weapons and armour pieces for each member of the team. This was one of the game's big incentives to grind gil, and also a big part of the dopamine drip. Not only would new equipment be exciting to see on your character, but it also upgraded your attack power and altered your material loadout to one degree or another. In 8 though, the upgrades to your attack that weapons give is fairly minimal. All of that is handled through the Junction system, meaning you absolutely can play through the whole game without any weapon upgrades. To upgrade a weapon, you first need to find one of several issues of Weapons Monthly that are scattered around the world map, often in locations that you can only visit once. This doesn't mean that those issues are missable exactly, but by the time you find the magazine shop that gives you your second chance to buy them, you'll be quite close to the end of the game, so won't get to enjoy their benefits as much. Each issue will instruct you on how to upgrade certain characters' weapons, though never all of them. From there, you have to head out into the wild and hunt down various rare items, and just to be clear, if you want the best weapons, you are going to be hunting some of the most infuriating enemies in the game, and it is one hell of a time sink to boot. However, once you've got the materials, you just need to take them to a weapon merchant and they'll do the surgery. Getting back to those limit breaks then. Squall gets new finishes when he acquires certain weapons. Don't worry about skipping one either. Even if you skip upgrading the weapons until the end, and just go after his Leonhart blade, it'll give you all the finishes, but especially Leonhart, which is easily on par with Cloud's Omnislash. Zell also has a multi-hit limit break that works like a minigame. As the game's resident kickboxer, he can bust out a variety of special moves that require FF6 Blitz-style inputs to work. Don't think you'll be enjoying the animations though, as you're on a timer to do as many inputs as you can to draw out the punishment. The limit ends when either the time runs out or Zell does one of his ultimate finishes. To get more moves for Zell's limit break, you need to find issues of Combat Kings. Again, these are located in missable, obtuse locations, one of which involves a lengthy process of revisiting the garden library to hit on Zell's crush, or you can just pick them up in the magazine shop later for considerably less stress. For Irvine, it's all about finding ammunition for his limit break. Choosing the all-American approach to solving any slight directed at him, Irvine has a brief window to go trigger happy on an enemy. First you choose your ammo type, and then you smash that trigger repeatedly until either the timer or the enemy's HP runs out. The best ammunition for this is refined from rare items, making it very hard to come by. Quistis is the blue mage in this game. Her limit break sees her choosing from a list of enemy skills to fire off, and consuming different items dropped by monsters will help her to learn more enemy skills. I suppose my only problem with this one is I like to have enemy skills as a tool in my arsenal all the time, and not just as a limit break. I have the same grievance with FF10. Quistis can even use Shockwave Pulsar, which is one of the final boss's super attacks, and can actually break the 4/9's damage limit. Now Rinoa actually has two distinctly different limit breaks. The first is connected to her adorable friend Angelo, and is upgraded by finding issues of Pet Pals magazines scattered all over the world, and then selecting them in her status screen to commence learning them. I may have completely forgot to do this on this replay too. Angelo's actions aren't just confined to limit breaks though, as he can respond as a reaction to Rinoa being attacked in different ways, bringing her healing items or even reviving her when felled. The second limit break, Angel Wings, becomes available for story reasons later in the game, and sees her hover above the ground and cast magic spells with much more potency than she usually can. The main problem here is that we lose control of her for the remainder of the battle, making this a less than useful ability to have, though there are ways to cheese it. Finally, Selphie is our wild card. Her limit slots basically lets her cast a random spell a random number of times. We are allowed to do over the option as much as we want until we find something we want, but the enemy's ATB gauge won't be paused and they can keep attacking you while you try to get lucky. The spells that she casts don't diminish the stocks in her spellbook either. She has several potent original moves as well that will appear depending on how dire the situation they're in is. With the almighty The End that I spent hours trying to get and couldn't, finishing any fight in the game immediately, no questions asked. As mentioned before, limit break spam, for me at least, is the most efficient way to destroy any enemy. Back in the day, it was something I reserved for Ultima and Omega weapons. I'd let them decimate my HP, pop a hero drink or a holy war on my party to turn them invincible, and spam limits in hope of getting that Leonhart finisher. I'm curious about your preferred party setups and tactics though, so let me know in the comments about that. Defeating this titan won't net you much more than an achievement and a rare item, but you do get this sick-ass certificate that you can print off and submit with your resume and covering letters when applying for jobs. When it comes to secret hunting, I honestly think Final Fantasy VIII is one of the best. Well, it was at one point anyway. Remember, I'm older now, and while I probably have more time to game than most guys my age who have kids, I still can't sink the hours of extra time needed into the major side hustles the game has to offer. But that's not to say I don't enjoy them. Let's start with the big one though, Triple Triad. An absolute banger of a card game that can be played with people all over the world and has a set of cards featuring all of the game's characters and monsters. The Final Fantasy Ultimerica book has various interviews with the development team and was graciously translated and posted to game FAQs. In it, battle programmer Kentaro Yasui says, "Initially, the plan for the card game was that the player would just be collecting cards, without the element of turning them into items. But there wasn't really anything unique to be gained from the card game that way. So, after requesting it, I was allowed to include the feature to turn the cards into items. So it was more of a casual distraction for players than something that would actually bolster your characters. However, GF Quetzalcoatl, one of the first you get, can learn Card Mod, a power that turns cards into items of all kinds. There are various quests that involve you hunting down exceptional card players who have rare cards that you can take from them, and since these super rares can be modded into the most powerful items, you may very well want to hunt all of these down. It'll save you some trouble in fighting difficult to find monsters, or ones that use exceptionally broken attacks on you. Cards will sometimes just be dropped by enemies too, or enemies that are close to being defeated can be turned into cards with another GF power. What a truly terrible fate to befall someone. The game is far less obtuse than Final Fantasy IX's Tetramaster 2. Every card has 4 numbers, and your goal is to place a card with a higher number touching a lower number on the grid to flip the card to your colour. That's it in a nutshell. But each region has its own rules that get thrown into the mix. Whether or not you like these rules is going to depend on why you're playing the game. If you want to collect all the rare cards, then you absolutely don't want to mess with any special rules. Playing with the base rules makes this a very pay-to-win game, just like Magic the Gathering. Don't even try to pretend it isn't. As long as you have cards with bigger numbers than your opponent, you'll crush them, take their rare cards and be on your way to the next game. But rules like Same can flip the script. In the case of Same, if 2 touching cards have the same numbers, you'll flip those cards and that will launch into a combo, flipping any other cards that you are now beating. Plus is another example where if the totals of 2 touching sides equal the same number, you get the same effect. The computer is very good at exploiting these rules to trap you in a position where it will get a combo, often leading them turning what looks like a defeat into a victory at the last card, using the Same or Plus rules to flip your stronger cards, and then comboing until the entire board is red. Strangely, every time this happens, the game immediately crashes to desktop, and you have to restart your game and act like the defeat never happened. No, really. It's totally a bug, guys. Game-breaking bugs that have for some reason never been addressed by the developers aside, your enjoyment of these rules will vary depending on your goal. If you just like the game and want to enjoy playing it, then you'll enjoy the challenge. But if your goal is to collect all the cards with as little effort as possible, well, you're going to want to manipulate the rules of the area to abolish the ones you don't want. There are various ways to do this. Basically, every time you enter a new area, players will suggest mixing up the game with their rules and rules you know from other areas. The outcome of this is somewhat randomized, so you kinda have to save scum your way into playing the game with only the rules you want in every area. It's a bit convoluted. Again though, I love Triple Triad, and I like that once I've done all the work, I get to reap some actual in-game benefit from it too. However, I just don't have the time to add hours to an already lengthy RPG at this stage in my life. But that's a me problem, of course. But there it is. Of the various weird cards we can get though, I have to highlight Poo Poo. Getting this is an extremely obtuse little side quest that sees you encountering a flying saucer at several locations around the world map before encountering the little pilot himself and giving him elixirs until he's happy. I love these little, wait, what the hell moments that we get in these games. Like, did Squall and the gang just make first contact with an actual extraterrestrial. The biggest other major secret we will uncover is the underwater research facility. Initially, this is just the place we'll encounter and acquire Bahamut. And I completely forgot I'm not supposed to move when the light is shining this time, and just had to grind my way through many battles to reach him. However, if you go back to the Ragnarok ship and talk to someone there, then return to the research center, you'll actually be able to descend all the way down to the bottom of it. You need to use a limited supply of steam pressure to open each of the locked doors, or Zell is willing to just punch the final machine until it opens if you let him. I don't recommend that though, as it switches on battles that can't be avoided even with the no encounter ability, and you're going to need your strength for what's at the bottom. This is the layer of Ultima, the first of the game's 2 super bosses, and he is leagues above anything you'll have encountered up to this point. He can be taken out with the aura limit break method, but his speed and the power of his attacks will leave you on the back foot and highly likely to die before you can get any kind of rhythm going with it. Fighting him is one of 2 places you can draw the final and most powerful Guardian force, Eden. One thing the FF devs are good at, when it comes to their super bosses, is hinting at the existence of a much larger world than we know of, and existential threats that don't even bat an eyelid at the plight of the planet or the heroes. Warmech in Final Fantasy I is not exactly the first super boss, but it was a much more powerful enemy that showed up and didn't fit at all with the game's fantasy aesthetic. I'm not sure exactly if the Central Ruins and the Lunatic Pandora are hinting at some ancient lost advanced culture or species, but Ultima Weapon and Eden could be another piece of that. We have to descend deep beneath the water to begin with in order to reach these ancient ruins, and even beyond all that, we have to winch the creature up from an immense pit. Your other option to find the Guardian Force Eden is the boss Tiamat in the final castle, but again, you won't really get to enjoy the benefits of having it at that point. Eden doesn't look like any of the other GFs. It looks more like some kind of advanced technology, not too dissimilar from the Lunatic Pandora. Its attack is almost reality-shattering, and is one of the few single attack moves that can actually break the 4/9 damage limit. Omega is an even stronger version of Ultima that can be fought in the final castle too. Even less is known about this monstrosity, beyond that it is the absolute king of monsters in this world. Lunar royalty, you might say. It is the ultimate challenge for anyone who has already mastered everything else the game can throw at them, and one hell of a fight. His ultimate attack will wipe your party, no questions asked, so you need hero drinks or holy wars, or the defend command to tank the hits. Though his attack pattern is predictable, so a well-prepared party can handle it. The list of mysteries you can uncover just seems to go on, and some of them involve spoilers of a sort, so I'll hold off on explaining them just yet. There are things like Timbermaniacs magazines to collect. Laguna financed his world adventure by writing travel pieces for this old magazine, and you can locate various issues around the world. These stories will then be added to Selphie's fan page for her favourite White Knight for you to read back at the garden. The Shumi village that I've already talked about is also completely optional, but has its own cool side quest connected to it and Laguna. The island closest to heaven and the island closest to hell are another odd one. These 2 islands are packed with level 99 encounters of the most dangerous monsters in the game. However, exploring them with the no encounter ability enables you to draw all kinds of powerful magic from various draw points scattered across each. There are also chocobo forests. You don't really need to ride chocobos much in this game. There are, however, a few places that can only be reached through their water running ability, and a small quest connected to visiting every chocobo forest. There's also this special little side game that was originally made for the Japanese-only Pocket Station, a Tamagotchi-style accessory that basically did what the Dreamcast VMU did. However, the game can be launched and run in a browser window on the PC version, and items found in this game can be shipped back into the main game. I think my only issue with most of this is farming rare items for things like Doom Train and various components for powerful weapons. It can take ages for the right enemy to pop, and even after you defeat it, you may not get the drop you want. It's like they were already planning an MMORPG even back then. All in all, I consider Final Fantasy VIII to be one of the best I've played for secret hunting. There's just so much cool, optional stuff to keep stumbling into, chase down, and extend your overall playtime in the game. And while some of it is annoying, most of it is pretty fun. Well, I think we're at the point of no return. Beyond here we take a deep look at our leading man and lady, our other leading man and lady, our villain, and an existential threat. Not from space this time, but from the far future. So this is your last spoiler warning. From here on out, the curtain is being pulled all the way back. The major conflict comes to an epic climax at the end of Disc 2, with Balamgarden and Galbadia Garden becoming locked in a climactic battle. I thought that the reason Balamgarden could fly was that it was constructed on top of an old military bunker, with some long-forgotten anti-missile defense system built into it, but I don't know, I guess they just by chance did exactly the same to Galbadia Garden? Either way, we have an epic battle, with Squall doubting himself the whole way, trying to juggle all the moving parts of the conflict, and finally, actually trusting his teammates and letting them take responsibility for things. He even shows incredible restraint and pragmatism in not abandoning his duties to run off and save Rinoa the moment she falls into peril, and, at a critical point in the battle, is able to give a rallying speech to his undertrained soldiers, who have just beaten back 2 waves of assault from the Galbadian military machine, and are barely holding together, before going full Phantom Thieves on Galbadia Garden with an all-out attack. Squall then takes personal responsibility for Rinoa's rescue, an action that forces us into one of the game's most pointless and frustrating minigames. I mean, it doesn't even give us any kind of controller prompt here to help us figure out what we need to do at the start. Bro, just summon Ifrit already. And then there's this mess. Really, dude? This is just another one of the countless soldiers we've been one-shotting this whole game, but for some reason we've got to play fisticuffs with him now. Squall is finally able to come to the rescue of his soon-to-be girlfriend though, and together, the main team breach into the Galbadian Garden, snag themselves a new Guardian force, get into another confrontation with Seifer, before finally having their big showdown with sorceress Adia herself, and this time, we are more than up to the task. This is an incredible moment of character development for Squall, the moody and inconsiderate young man who still lies in his bed stressing about having to rely on others, who has dreams of standing in the rain, wondering why his sis vanished on him, who had no idea how to bolster his teammates' morale during their first operation. This guy flexes not only military strategy, a capacity to delegate to his trusted lieutenants, and the ability to inspire his soldiers with his words, but also he's leaping headfirst into the conflict and being the one to personally pull them out of the fire when they're in dire need. He wins over their hearts and minds and transforms a bunch of cadet seeds into a force capable of standing toe-to-toe with one of the strongest military forces in the world. And they win. Now that's some character development right there. Woohoo! And all by the end of Disc 2. I guess those other 2 discs are just promotional artwork and making of documentaries, right? Shame we never got any kind of resolution on that Laguna stuff, but not all mysteries need to be solved, right? Well, no. It's quite normal for Final Fantasy to hold off on revealing its true villain and conflict until a considerable chunk of the game is finished. After striking down Adia, she seems to come to her senses and starts behaving like a mother reunited with her children, who've grown up into young men and women she can be truly proud of. A little before that though, we see Rinoa stumbling through the haze like a zombie, reviving Seifer, and then blacking out. Sorceress Adia Kramer is the wife of Garden Headmaster Sid Kramer. The 2 of them ran an orphanage together that got more than a little crowded in the aftermath of the last Sorceress War, and she played mother to many a lost child. Adia never had any designs for the world, or to use her powers to terrify people, or bend reality to a shape pleasing only to her. She wanted to live in seclusion with her knight, and help those she could when she could. At some point after the Sorceress War though, she approached her husband with the idea of creating the Garden, an establishment that could train elite soldiers with the specific goal of combating a sorceress should one go bad in the future. I doubt at the time Sid ever imagined he would have to order his powerful fighting force to kill his own wife, but that's exactly what he did when she lost her mind and fell under the control of Ultimerica, a sorceress from the far future who can cast her mind back into the past and possess those of previous sorceresses. A sorceress with a very specific goal: She wants to compress time, and not only end existence, but deny it entirely. We see here another layer to Cid's decision to just offload military command onto Squall once the objective for stopping the sorceress was established. As he says himself later, he was in a double bind. If the Seeds win, he loses his wife. If they lose, he loses not only his best soldiers, but people who are in his eyes his own sons and daughters. There was only ever a slim chance that the killing blow would be withheld, and he'd somehow get his wife and kids back. He admits that his decision was selfish, and that he basically ran away from his own responsibilities. But he's not a warrior at the end of it all. I wouldn't say he's a coward either. I sure as hell wouldn't be able to handle that one in his place. Temporal possession is a hell of a power. But this is certainly not the first time we've encountered something like it now, is it? After all, our main party has been falling asleep and waking up in the past as passengers in the minds and bodies of Laguna, Kiros, and Ward. This particular gift belongs to Elone. The Elone who stole Laguna's heart in the past and was eventually kidnapped by Estar soldiers. Squall's big sister at the orphanage, who is the reason he's experiencing moments in Laguna's life. In fact, Elone's abrupt and earth-shattering disappearance from our young hero's life was a result of needing to get her quickly to safety from forces looking to study and exploit her unique gifts. Squall was never told anything because the less he knew, the safer he was. Adir explains here that the Galbadians believed she inherited the powers of the missing sorceress Adele, but that she actually inherited hers when she was 5 from another sorceress. It would seem that the existence of more than one sorceress isn't exactly common knowledge, and I suspect a big part of that is giving the second and potentially third, fourth, and however many there are, a chance at a peaceful life. Since Adele is still unaccounted for, Adir suspects Ultimerica might try to possess her next, if she can. Adele is not only at the height of her power, but she's also utterly selfish and corrupt, just like Ultimerica. She'd be a far better match for her than Adir, who was, in her own small way, fighting to keep Elone safe from Ultimerica's hands. Squall isn't all that interested in this though. You see, having finally started to take down the walls and actively trust people, he's having trouble processing a lot of emotions that he's done his best to keep subdued his entire life. And the one overpowering thought running through his whole mind now is Rinoa. He has admitted to himself that he doesn't just want her alive and well, but that he needs her in his life, and he's utterly terrified of losing her. He's got a bad history of important women in his life leaving him after all. Still, these two pieces of information converge to give Squall the idea to track down Elone and have her send him back to the past to, if not save Rinoa, at least try to understand what happened to her after the battle with Adir. While they had initially hoped to find Elone on a ship that operated as a kind of mobile home and base for a group called the White Seed, they discover that during a Galbadian attack, Elone jumped onto an Estar ship that appeared out of nowhere and fled to safety. Without her aboard, the Galbadians quickly lost interest in the White Seed ship. This leaves Squall with no other choice but to go to Estar to find her, and if that means walking the whole damn way with Rinoa's unconscious body on his back, then that's what he's going to do. And yeah, the Seeds have cars, and I'm sure one of them would drive over this bridge just fine. But this is kind of a beautiful moment. Let's wind all the way back to the flashback where all the team discovered they'd grown up together in the same orphanage. Squall's memories of himself are, in his own words, a shameful sight. Though this is one of the earlier moments where he's realizing he didn't turn out okay. Squall focused on being physically strong and independent so that he wouldn't have to depend on anyone, and then he shut people out because he worries about what people think of him. And he actually hates that he does, so he'd rather just shut people out than risk them seeing his vulnerabilities. Okay, he's alone and opening up to an unconscious girl, but just saying these things out loud gives them power, makes them real, and it's a hell of a step towards finally overcoming them. He thinks everyone will be laughing at him, trudging along all the way to Estar without even knowing if Elone can actually help. So, what do people think of you, big guy? You're their fucking hero, that's what. You led them around the world and pulled them through a battle with a superior military force. You inspired them with your words and put yourself on the front line right there next to them. And those people The ones he was scared to let in, the ones who he thought wouldn't understand and would laugh at him, they're all waiting for him at the end of the journey, all willing to push ahead with him. It makes you think that maybe those negative little voices in our head don't actually know shit about us, that maybe the only power they have is what we give them, and that all we have to do is ignore them, remain true to ourselves, and they'll be proved wrong and just go away. Not every battle is fought with muscles and sword, big guy, but they must be fought, and the victories are just as sweet here, if not more so. Travelling to the city of Estar, Squall and Rinoa are actually blasted up into space to the Estar space station, which exists primarily to observe Sorceress Adele's prison. Yep, the old hag was somehow sealed in an anti-magic container and blasted up into space. Her confinement even gets personally examined by the president of Estar himself. Wonder who that is. When Squall meets with Elone, she explains that she's been sending him through time to try and change the past, a feat that is far beyond her abilities to achieve. On account of Laguna rushing off to save her, and eventually rescuing her from Dr. Odine's lab in Estar, he wasn't in Winhill when Rain died. It seems she died in childbirth, or possibly from complications in the aftermath, and her last wish was to show Laguna her baby. Their baby. Wonder who that turned out to be. Elone isn't a true sorceress though. She only has the power to witness events in the past, but was able to understand the love that Laguna had for her by going on his big adventure to save her, even getting involved with helping the Resistance finally trap Edea in this bubble through one of the most hilariously dumb Saturday morning cartoon style plans you could possibly imagine. Even so, Squall is just hoping to gain some kind of information by observing what happened to Rinoa. However, the answers quickly present themselves. You see, Edea is no longer a sorceress. She relinquished her powers at the end of their last battle, and those powers have to go somewhere. They have to pass to a girl. So Rinoa is a sorceress, and that means Ultimerica can possess her. What follows is a truly heart-wrenching set piece. Down on the surface, the Galbadian army, now led by Seifer, have managed to pull the lunatic Pandora up from the depths it was dropped in after Adele's defeat, and are moving it into position for the Lunar Cry. As the pressure builds, Rinoa awakens and essentially zombies her way all the way out into space and up to Adele's prison. As the Lunar Cry commences, she releases Adele, and the two are caught in the blast. Adele forced to Earth to be caught by the Pandora, and Rinoa, she gets blown out into space. As they flew the space station in an escape pod, Elone uses her powers to help Squall reach Rinoa, and he's able to locate her, leading to him just throwing himself out into space to catch her and... Yeah, bro doesn't really have a plan from this point on, but what a thing to do. To just throw yourself into the void on a 1,000,000 to 1 shot that you'll catch the woman you love, just so she doesn't have to die alone. But hey, when in doubt, there's always Deus Ex Machina. I mean, fate and love that conquers all no matter what, right guys? Also, this whole thing here where Squall is reunited with the woman he walked over an ocean and flew up into space to save, who he leapt into the void to catch with no plan whatsoever about where he'd go once he'd got her. They are finally alone and safe together, and all she wants is a hug, and he freaks out about it. By Ramu's beard, my bro, I will suplex a train onto your face, so help me Odin. But after they've done a little house cleaning on their new ship, the Ragnarok, Rinoa just goes ahead and helps herself to what she's been after this whole time. And she doesn't let him worm his way out of it this time either. Let's just let them enjoy a moment together. Rinoa confesses that she's scared about being a sorceress, or more so, how this marks her as an outsider. She doesn't want to be the monster hidden under children's beds, or someone people recoil from. She doesn't want to be a danger to people, or for them to think that she could be. This leads to her, foolishly, surrendering to Estar soldiers when the Ragnarok finally lands, and being taken to be sealed up just like Adele was, to prevent her from becoming a danger. Squall, thinking he's being mature at this point, respects her wishes and lets her go, and it takes the rest of the team to point out that was a really dumb thing for him to do. And so he runs off to basically do the scene from the opening credits. While this isn't the end of the story, it's kind of the end of Squall and Rinoa's character arcs. You've probably realised now, but this story is less about boy meets girl, and more about growing up and conquering inner demons. It's very Squall based, I think, but Rinoa undergoes her own transformation too. Obviously she has access to insane powers, when she's correctly set up for them, thanks to her new sorceress based limit break, but she's also fully a member of the squad now. Despite not being an orphan or a seed, she's one of the family, and all of them, especially Squall, will fight and die for her safety. Squall though, well, I think if anyone watching this, or who has ever played this game, thinks this guy here is the same as this guy here, well, you're probably not even literate, let alone media literate. All that remains is for our fully matured and battle-ready lion to go and face the final challenge of the game, and maybe, this time, we can all sail off into the sunset together. So we should probably talk about what happened to Laguna. After imprisoning Adele and finally rescuing Elone, Laguna prepares to pack up and head on back to Windhill to finally get a piece of that quiet country life he's been dreaming of this whole time. Unfortunately, life decides to get in the way one more time when he winds up basically being elected the de facto president of Estar. You see, a collective of resistance cells might work well together when they have a common enemy to stand against, but once that's removed, they break down into bickering groups of different and often conflicting political ideologies who are just as likely to plunge the entire nation into civil war or leave it weak enough for another authoritarian to swoop in and take the reins. Laguna was put forward since he was the hero of every group and, well, he's kind of charming in his own way. With the situation being too volatile in Estar to simply walk away, and feeling a debt of gratitude towards the resistance, who'd helped him to rescue Elone, he agrees to stay until things over here are stable enough for someone else to take charge. Elone is sent back to Windhill and reunited with Rain briefly, but she passes away soon after, and both Elone and Rain's baby are sent to Adia's orphanage. Laguna's story feels a lot more real to me than Squall's in many ways. Not because it doesn't have a traditional happy ending, I'm not that cynical, but because it doesn't go where he wants it to. He doesn't meet his first true love and live happily ever after with her. His first bumbling attempt at romance gets cut short by a war and responsibilities and things beyond his control. The soldier never comes home to see the pianist sing and have their tearful reunion. Instead, he washes up in a small town called Windhill and begins a new life as a more mature man with more mature ideas about love. Rain isn't some glamorous musician who dazzled him on stage. She's a good woman with a little girl to take care of, one who Laguna falls in love with and wants to spend his life keeping safe and making happy, and this quieter life, this simple life in a small town with the two women who make him happiest in all the world, is also stolen from him. And just when he's on the cusp of getting it back, he's denied by more responsibilities, things that are so much bigger than what he wants, that matter to so many more people. And before he knows it, it's already too late to go back, because even if he did, that life he left behind wouldn't even be there anymore. That's the thing about real love. It isn't boy meets girl and everything's great. Dating is much closer to a gacha game, especially with how we play it with apps now, and love is something that happens within the larger ballpark of life. And life's a bitch. We all have so many big dreams and ideas when we're young and full of energy, and we think we have so much time to get it all done, and somehow, when we're not looking, it all slips away, and suddenly, it's too late to go out and make those big dreams come true, and we've fallen into a situation where we have responsibilities that we can't just walk away from because there are people who depend on us. Things rarely turn out the way we want them to. And that's not to say that it's always bad. Hell, Laguna seems like a great president, and no one's voted him out yet. But this line right here, well, let's just say it hits differently in your 40s than it does in your 20s. Don't get me wrong, I don't really feel old by any stretch, and I've achieved a lot in my life that I'm proud of. But I can't help but be aware that I'm past the halfway point, that's for sure. As someone says later in the game, time. It will not wait. The final plan is to basically let Ultimerica win. You see, her power to cast her mind back through time is thanks to a device that Dr. Odin made based on Elone's brain scan. It's not authentic and therefore limited, so Ultimerica needs access to the real deal to reach back far enough for the time compression. When this happens, the squad will essentially surf on the temporal tsunami to arrive in Ultimerica's time and fight her there one-on-one. Then, after she's defeated, the bubble should pop, throwing them back roughly towards their own time. In order to navigate their way back home, they need to hold on to the things that matter the most to them in their hearts. Their friends, their family, their loved ones, whatever it is they hold dear, and that will be the beacon to guide them home. You might say, they're going to defeat a god with the power of friendship. Oh, and Kiros dropping this bombshell? Wait, what? What? Oh. Dad? One of the most horrific things about Ultimerica is that regardless of whether or not our heroes destroy her in the future, she will be born and rise to the levels of power it takes for her to wreak havoc on this world's future, and even reach all the way back through the mists of time to do the same in our heroes' present. Even if they win, they still arrive too late to spare thousands, if not millions, from the horror she will bring down upon the world. Unlike Sephiroth though, we never really get to meet this woman, or come to understand her motivations or her actions. What we learn from Edea though is that sorceresses are somewhat cut off from the rest of society because of their powers and the reputations of certain members of their sisterhood. She herself lived on the Central Continent, far from civilization, and took care of orphan children there. When Rinoa asks her about being a sorceress, Edea tells her to find a knight. Not just someone to protect her, but someone who can anchor her to the rest of the world. Someone who sees past her power and the potential danger or benefit she represents, and sees just the real person she is. A connection that will remind her that beneath all that power, she's just a human girl. The sorceress is like Adele who went bad, either lost or never had their knights, and this is how they became first disconnected and then bitter, though I'd wager that violence was brought to their door first and not the other way around. Edea is convinced Ultimerica doesn't have a knight in her time. Instead, she only has her power and the mysteries of the universe to unravel with it, and tiny insects that see her as an object of terror all around her. Reminds me of a guy I know. Ultimerica's goal of compressing time and somehow becoming a goddess in the process does seem pretty wild. It was a big complaint that a lot of people have about the game that has led to some fairly out there fan theories about who she really is. And look, you're allowed to have whatever headcanon you want, but just like most fan theories, it's easy to see that whoever crafted this one started with the conclusion and worked backwards to find the pieces that fit, while conveniently ignoring everything else. Plus, I think there's just a much simpler explanation for it all. Were Ultimerica some kind of great old one or eternal cosmic being, we'd all actually be okay with their motives not making the best sense, because their minds simply operate on a different scale to our own. Well, just because Ultimerica was born a girl, and probably lived a normal girl's life at some point, doesn't mean that in her final form, as possibly the most powerful sorceress ever, she has anything close to relatable motivations. She plays with the fabric of time and space like it's a toy for her amusement after all. She exists on a different scale, where the small lives of regular people seem completely irrelevant, even when they happen to look kind of like her. We've had plenty of very human tyrants who are able to dehumanize and commit atrocities that cause unimaginable suffering just to further their own plans and enhance their own bases of power in fantasy, and they are just corrupt in the regular ways of wealth and political power. But a time-bending sorceress is on a level far beyond that. It's likewise never stated anywhere that sorceresses in FF8 are immortal. The reason Adele is kidnapping girls all over the world is to actually find someone to pass on her powers to when she dies. In fact, if you read Ultimerica's final words in the final battle, similar to Squall learning about Seifer, she seems to be dealing with the concept of her own mortality. She has become so powerful that her actions do not have consequences, save for those of her own making, of course. Maybe she is long-lived. Maybe she even thought she was immortal, that none of the rules mattered to her, that she had all the time to do as she pleased, and then one day, just like Laguna, it was all gone, and she had no idea where it went. Regardless of her motives, the final castle is kind of a blast. It actually reminds me of the Tower of Terror in Tokyo Disney Sea. It's a really refreshing change from the rest of the game's locations, and plays into the idea that Kitase had about having an honest-to-goodness sorceress as a villain in a world with advanced technology. Ultimerica has been fighting seeds all her life though, and is very prepared for them. Entering her castle seals every single seed power, and even prevents using save points. You must defeat her collection of guardians in order to unlock each ability, and if you're especially masochistic, you can go after the game's biggest and baddest enemy here too. In her final true form though, yeah, quite terrifying, and not something I'd attribute human motivations to. But she still falls to the Leonhart attack like the rest of them. It all comes full circle in the end. Ultimerica is defeated and the time compression snaps back. The team run back to their own time, and Squall and Rinoa fixate on a point where they stood in a field of flowers and made a promise to each other. A promise that this is where they'd be here waiting for each other. The same words we saw all the way back at the very beginning of the game. At first though, our boy overshoots by just a smidge and winds up in Adia's orphanage, watching a little boy run off to find his sis, and matron coming to collect him and comfort him. This is how she learns about Garden and Seed, and goes on to share the ideas with her husband Sid. The final dot is connected when Ultimerica appears. Now dying and just wanting to let go, the sorceress from the future just needs to pass her powers on to someone. Adia takes them, as she's already a sorceress herself, and she doesn't want any of the girls in the orphanage to become one. One day, she will pass those powers to Rinoa, who will pass them on to someone else when she dies, and so on, all the way back down to Ultimerica again. Which means she's the last one. The line of sorceresses doesn't end, but it gets caught in a temporal loop and lost forevermore. Squall finally forgives himself too. He doesn't look upon that little boy and see a shameful sight. In the end, we are all different people all through our lives, and we aren't always equipped for the tragedies and pains that life sets upon us at that time. It's not important if we got it wrong in the past though, just so long as we make things better now and fight hard to make them even better in the future. The final cutscene sees Squall seemingly lost in time and unable to make his way back to his home. This montage of images is somewhat reflected all the way back in the intro too, meaning that we could have been getting hints even at the very beginning of what was coming here. But in the end, Rinoa finds Squall exactly where he'd said he'd be. Though for a moment there, things aren't looking good. But as the sky parts and the sun shines down, her face lights up. We see Seifer now free of the sorceress's manipulations, just enjoying some fishing with his two best friends. The two who never gave up on him, even when that meant taking a step back and letting Squall and his friends confront him in battle. Laguna finally returns to Windhill to look upon the grave of the woman he married. Well, unofficially anyway. He remembers back to their last night together before he ran off to save Elone and the ring he gave to her. He looks back over the field to see his family waiting for him and Balam Garden sailing overhead. And after we get a wonderful self-shot movie of the crew enjoying their victory party with all the important members in attendance, and Zell finally getting a ton of hot dogs to eat, we look out upon a balcony to find our sorceress and her knight together and safe, and it's about damn time, stud. About damn time. While Final Fantasy VIII received praise from numerous review outlets and had incredible commercial success, it didn't have quite the same impact as Final Fantasy VII did. That is one hell of an act to follow though, especially when you consider that for the majority of the global audience, it was their introduction to not only the series, but to RPGs from Japan in general. And there's just something about that first hit that no subsequent hit can ever give you. While it stands in the shadow of 7 and 9, it is undoubtedly a flawed masterpiece that tried things with systems and storytelling that simply hadn't been done before. And while they had a lot of hits, they also got plenty of criticism. The story was considered overly convoluted even by the standards of Japanese role-playing games at the time, and having tried to write a concise summary of it here, well, I'm feeling that. It also has issues such as the memory loss hook, appearing seemingly out of nowhere and then vanishing the moment after, leaving a lot of people wondering what it was doing there at all. The time compression story also threw a lot of people through a loop. They had trouble comprehending the sorceress's motivations, and the team just riding the compression to the future in the endgame felt kinda flimsy also. Like, come on, just give us a Guardian Force with a time travel spell that will disappear at the end of the game so that Ultimerica can't find it in the future, or just anything simpler than, we just need to let our enemy do the exact thing we spent the whole game trying to prevent it from doing. I've put forward my feelings about these things though, and explained how I square them away for myself. That's not to say that this is some kind of definitive take on the subject, just how I see it. Junction 2 is kinda flawed. The game hits you with numerous tutorials in rapid succession in those opening hours, and constant information dumps like that can leave players fatigued and just skipping through, hitting that auto button and forgetting all about it. Which is a shame, because if you really engage with it in good faith, it's a great system, albeit one that's far too easy to break. I replayed this game multiple times back in the day, and much like 7, it played a part in the shaping of who I am as an adult, and the chain of decisions that led to me being more focused on seeing the world and eventually settling in Japan, rather than just getting a job, buying a house, getting married, and having kids. I actually wouldn't start dating for a few years until after I'd played Final Fantasy VIII, and honestly, I've still yet to meet a woman who I'd throw myself into the void for. I'm sure she's out there, somewhere. The themes of Final Fantasy VIII are about love, personal development, and the inevitable march of time. For our final boss, that march drove her to seek immortality and godhood, and in the process, inflict immense suffering on not only her own time, but to reach into the past and do it there too. For Laguna, it meant losing the life he wanted with the people he wanted the most, to take on duties and responsibilities and try to mend a broken nation. Time will not stop. That is true. Everything comes and goes, and everything changes, but none of that is even remotely as important as what we have now. We can't cut off the people we love just because we know they'll be gone someday. We can't build up walls and hide behind them just so we don't have to face the inevitable change, and we can't stop trusting people just because some of them let us down in the past. That is the path towards bitterness and regret. We have to live in this moment and deal with what is in front of us now. All the bad, of course, but especially all the good. That means above all else, the people who bring us the most happiness, the friends who'll stand by us even when we're making just the worst decisions, and those we allow into the most intimate places of our heart. Squall Leonhart is not an edgy emo kid who hates everyone. In fact, he never was. That's just a big front he puts up to try and keep everyone at arm's length. He's a young man with a lot of baggage who doesn't really know how to deal with it. A state of affairs I'd say most of us can relate to. But as strong as he thought those walls were, it only took the right group of people and the right collection of events to slowly wear them down, and one person in particular to cut right into his core and reveal him for who he is. He's a beautiful and vulnerable man, full of doubts and insecurities. Just like Cloud, his weaknesses give him texture and make him relatable. He's not a chosen one or a perfect hero who never flinches in the face of danger, and when the weight of the world is on his shoulders, he would like nothing more than to just go and lie in his bed and not think about it. But the fact that he does get up and deal with it is what makes him all the more heroic. He's a leader who can inspire his peers into action even when they are almost completely spent from fighting. He's a warrior who'll plunge headfirst into the thick of combat and won't leave anyone behind. He's a man of passion, drive, and unwavering determination. A man with the heart of a lion. Since we're already past the 3-hour mark and I'm at the end of a marathon editing session and have a sore throat, I'm going to keep the sign off pretty quick this time. The next video is going to be Final Fantasy XII: The Zodiac Age. This will end the Final Fantasy marathon that I've subjected or treated myself to depending on how you look at it. and will most likely be the last video of the year, considering the pace I'm releasing these at. This is actually a first time for me, as I didn't play it back when it came out, but it's the only numbered entry from the PS2 era that I've got left to play. The playthrough is almost finished, and the script has already been started. So, thank you all for watching, and if you're here, for staying till the end. Patreon and Blue Sky links are in the description if you'd like to support me making more content like this. Thank you to The Summer of Mark for reading some Yoshinori Kitase quotes for me, and thanks for coming. I appreciate all of you. Until next time, take care.